Hello, welcome to this long collection of scary stories. Many of them are allegedly true. You be the judge. Let me know what you think in the comments. If this is your first time here, welcome. These videos are designed to creep you out while helping you relax or fall asleep. I really hope you enjoy, and please keep something in mind. I try to keep the ads to a minimum at the beginning of the video to get them out of the way fast. If you've never been here before, or if you're a long-time listener and you haven't subscribed, it would really mean the world. It's free, and it'll let YouTube know that you prefer a real person narrating the stories. And of course, if you like the video, then please hit the like button for me. Last thing, I just want to say thank you for being here, when I know that you have many other choices. Now, let's begin.
One evening when I was 9, I saw a man sitting on his balcony in the building across the street, staring directly towards my window. Since then, I have been scared of people staring through my window, so I usually kept my blinds down at night. One night, a few years after that I was lying in bed trying to sleep, I noticed the rays of moonlight coming through the blinds were suddenly blocked by something. I looked over to the window and saw the silhouette of a tall man standing on my balcony behind the blinds of my window. I lived on the 4th floor, so how did he get to my balcony, and why was he standing there, motionless? My brother and I shared a room, so he saw me staring at the window and asked what was wrong. I asked him if he saw the silhouette on the balcony, and he said that it's probably nothing and that I should just go to sleep. The next day, I lifted up the blinds to only cover half the window, but this time I didn't see anything before going to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the bathroom. When I came back, I noticed a man wearing a trench coat standing on the balcony in the same place as the previous night. The blinds were just low enough to cover his face. I stood there terrified for a few seconds and then ran up to my brother's bed and tried to wake him up. Wake up, he's back." He was half asleep and mumbled, "Go to sleep already, it's late." "Please, I'm not kidding, he's real, he's standing right there." He sat up and froze in place, and then quietly whispered, "Oh my God, how did he get there? I'm not sure, but we need to tell Mom and Dad." Then, the man walked over to the balcony door and started aggressively twisting the handle and pushing it with his shoulder. But thankfully, the door was locked. My brother's face turned pale, and he passed out. I asked if he was okay, but he didn't respond. When I looked back towards the balcony, the man was gone. I haven't seen him in a long time after that, and I thought he had left me alone. My brother also says it hasn't happened to him again, and that we were probably just imagining things because we were just scared kids. A few years ago, I finally moved out of my parents' apartment and got my own 2-floor house. And recently, I've started seeing him again when the blinds are low enough to cover his face. But I usually just ignore him now since I always lock all doors and windows, and he doesn't seem to do much. One night I was trying to sleep, but then I got hungry, so I got up and went to the kitchen. When I got there, he was standing outside of the window, but there was no balcony there and nothing for him to stand on. I have tried to lift up the blinds before to see his face, but every time I try to do it, when he's there, they wouldn't budge. So this time I decided to try opening the window instead. I started slowly opening it and then tried peeking through to see him, but his hand reached out and grabbed me by the face, covering my eyes, and then pulled me out of the window, and the last thing I remember is falling towards the ground. The next day I woke up on the grass in my backyard, right under the window that he pulled me out of. I tried coming back in, but all the doors and windows were locked, and all the blinds were pulled all the way down, except the window of my bedroom. He was standing there looking at me like he usually does, but for the first time, He was the one on the inside. I didn't know what to do, so I just decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Then I noticed it wasn't just my house. Every single house had its blinds down and the curtains closed. And in each one, the people who lived in the houses were standing behind the half-covered windows. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew they were looking at me. It started raining, and I headed back to my home. Thankfully, I forgot to take my coat inside and had left it on the front porch. I put it on and continued walking around the town. Everywhere I looked, it was all the same. No cars on the road or people on the streets. Just people standing by their windows with their faces hidden by the blinds. I tried ringing doorbells and knocking on doors and windows, and even trying to open doors in case any of them were unlocked. I was stuck outside for hours, and it was starting to get dark. The moon was full, and it was a beautiful rainy evening, and everything felt so calm despite how strange it was. Eventually I managed to find a window with the blinds pulled halfway down, but there wasn't any person there. It was on the second floor, and I had to use the emergency stairs to get to it. The blinds were pulled down to my neck. I would have bent down to get a better look, but I had back pain from the fall, and my legs hurt from walking all day, so I just looked through the holes in the blinds instead. I saw someone sleeping on the bed, inside of the apartment. Finally, a person who wasn't motionlessly standing by the window. I knocked on the window to wake him up. He sat up and stared at me with a scared expression. I didn't realize how creepy I looked. He got out of bed and went to turn the light on. I decided not to scare him, so I went back down and started thinking of what I should do. I didn't want to do it, but seems like the only way to escape this is to pull someone else into it. I got back up and saw that he was trying to sleep again. The poor guy probably thought I was an illusion from sleep deprivation. I started knocking on the window again, and he immediately sat up and looked at me with a terrified expression. I tried speaking, but the sound of the rain and wind muffled my voice, so I just continued knocking. He very hesitantly walked towards the window. I got closer to the blinds so that he couldn't see me by bending down, so he would have to open the window. He fruitlessly tried to pull the blinds up. After a lot of hesitation, he started slowly opening the window. I hated what I had to do, but I did it anyway. As he slowly opened the window and tried peeking around it, I grabbed him by the neck and used all the strength I had to pull him out and throw him onto the street. Then, I climbed through the window and shut it. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, fearing that it may not have worked. But when I opened them, I was so happy to see the cars driving outside, I almost started crying. It felt like I was stuck in there for days. I can't imagine what it was like for the other guy to be stuck there for years. I exited the person's apartment, and when I got back home, I pulled my blinds up and have kept them up since then. I hope whoever I pulled in wasn't in there for too long. Hopefully one day I can forget this ever happened, but I don't think I will. As I am sitting here thinking back, I really was happy living with a lot of kids my age. I was a happy boy who loved playing with all of my other brothers, not realizing the fact that I, as an orphan, was abandoned by my real parents and delivered to the orphanage. The people who worked at the orphanage gave us enough love to never feel lonely and filled the void that my parents had created. I had a particularly best friend whose name was Alex. We slept in different rooms, but we did everything together. The caregivers at the orphanage always joked about us secretly being brothers, and I felt the same way. Those really were happy days without worry. How I wish they would have lasted. I still remember the fire, the warmth that started as a caring embrace as I was sleeping soundly in my room, quickly made it feel like I was in a sauna. That's when the screams started. Horrifying screams filled my blissful dreams, turning them dark and twisted. I woke up with a shriek as one of the kids whom I shared the room with had started shaking me. We all looked at each other with a terrified expression, not knowing what to do. That's when one of the supervisors, in a hurry, opened the door. With sweat running down his face and a panicked look, shouted that we needed to hurry and follow him. We ran down the hall to the door that would lead us outside. As I was running, I could see all the other doors open and the other kids running towards the door. As I got outside, I was met with a crowd of other kids all crying while looking at the burning building. Firefighters had already arrived and were trying to extinguish the fire, to no avail. The fire had spread too much and could not be stopped. I suddenly got hit with a feeling of loss, and tears started running down my face. At that time, I did not understand why I was crying, but I had not yet realized what I had really lost. I turned around looking for Alex, and when I couldn't see him in the crowd of kids, I started panicking. I tried desperately to find him among the others, and as I was just about to give up the search for him, I saw him standing alone, away from the others. I hurried over to him to express my happiness that he made it out safely, but he just stood there with an emotionless look, staring at the burning building. I had no time to talk to him as one of the supervisors yelled to gather so they could count everyone. We remained at that place until the fire had almost burned out. 2 buses came to pick us up and drive us to the city where they would deliver us to various families who volunteered to take in some kids in light of this unpredicted emergency. Before we all split and went to the various families, the supervisors delivered a sad message. One of the kids had not made it out. No one had woken him before it was too late. I did not hear his name, but I looked over at Alex, who did not seem to have a reaction about the sad news either. A lot of the supervisors came over and hugged me with tears in their eyes and saying, "It will be okay." I was really lucky that I and Alex would go together to live with the same family, which actually made me very excited. Apparently, the family of 2, consisting of a husband and wife, had a son who about a year ago had disappeared and was never seen again. So they had a spare bedroom that they never used. When our new parents came to pick me and Alex up, they both had a very kind look on their face as they greeted us with open arms. If only that kind look on their faces had remained. As soon as we walked in the front door, we were led into a room that looked more like a dungeon from a movie than a bedroom. The room was very dark, only lit by red lights, making it almost impossible to see the whole room. Thick blankets had been bolted to the window, so no light would ever reach the walls of the inside. There were no beds. The only piece of furniture was a small metal table filled with knives, scissors, and other kinds of tools. And the smell, it smelled like something had died there and was just left to rot. Of course, I got worried when what I expected to be a comfy bedroom for Alex and me to stay in turned out to be a room from the most twisted of horror movies, smelling so horrible that it almost made me want to vomit. But I was only a kid, and I chose to stay positive and believe they only meant the best for the 2 of us. Otherwise, why would they have been so kind as to take us in when we were in need of a place to stay? The belief I had in them was quickly drowned by the excruciating pain they made me go through. We were put in handcuffs, and with the most despicable look on her face, my new mother told me she would cut me into pieces if I so much as made a sound. And with that, she closed the door to the room. I did not understand the situation and looked over at Alex, who sat with a kind of reassuring smile on his face. I looked over to the corner next to me, and there laid a blanket covering something. I could easily detect that the smell came from there. When I lifted the blanket, it made sense why the room smelled so horrible. A bloody, torn body of someone not very old lay right next to me, and as I saw the horrible sight before me, I passed out. I know now that the bloody, rotten corpse belonged to their real son, who had given in to their despicable abuse and passed away. Apparently, they had covered up their devilish acts by making it seem like he had been kidnapped or run away, never to return. Those years were literal hell. I did not have it as tough as Alex did, though. At least they gave me food, even though it was completely rotten. It took some days before my stomach had gotten used to it, and I stopped throwing up the rotten food. They must have fed Alex while I was sleeping, because he never looked hungry. We always feared when the door would open, and a new fist would greet our already beat-up faces. They did a lot of unspeakable things to us that sometimes made me wish I would just perish. Even when they weren't in the room, they still haunted my dreams. The scariest part is that if you saw them walking on the streets, you would probably think they were just an ordinary sweet couple, but they showed us their real side, their twisted faces overflowing with pleasure every time I was caught because of a fist in the stomach, or seeing my hopeless face filled with terror as they prepared their own homemade devices made to torture us. As horrible as it may sound, I was really relieved that I wasn't alone in that hell. Alex was strong. He never cried, and he would always lift my spirit with his smiles. He had always been very talkative, so at nights before we both fell asleep, we would talk about the outside world and how we would both like to visit a lot of different countries. He really saved me from going insane. When I turned 16, the police finally stormed into the room and saw the horror that we had endured for so many years. The Office of Child Affairs had started to suspect the couple when they had not allowed anyone to see us for so long. They faced a lifetime in prison, and for the first time in so long, smelling the fresh air, we walked into the sunlight as free boys. Food had never tasted this good, and Alex and I ate until we were completely full. The memories of that horrible place haunted me for many years, even though my new parents were the nicest people on earth. Alex really helped me cope with everything. He was always there for me. As I started going to school, I made a lot of new friends, and I would always go home and tell Alex about all the funny things that happened in school. I met the love of my life in that same school, and I moved in with her when I turned 21. I was really happy, but I started talking to Alex less and less. It had been 5 years since I talked to him last. I really miss him, and I hope to meet him again one day, but I think I have always known why I cried that day when the orphanage burned down. My mind couldn't comprehend losing the one thing that I loved more than anything in the world. Alex was there for me through all of my hard experiences, keeping me sane, until I was ready to let go. I could finally remember the name of the boy who died in the fire. His name was Alex. When people ask me at parties, I tell them I work in HR for an accounting firm, or that my corner office has some bland, nonsense title like managing consultant, congealed to this glass and black lettering. They stop asking questions pretty quickly. When you pull out your card and cover their whole tab, curiosity peaks a little again, but soon gets washed over with inebriation. They wake up in the morning, and if their wife or lover asks them what it is I do, they just say, something in like administration, I think. And that's it. Plainness can hide all sorts of eccentricity. Can you think of anything plainer than the American Hops Museum? Even its boxy white form, sitting squat in the town of Yakima, Washington, yields little to hold your attention. The whole building is dedicated to the no doubt fascinating history of the cultivation of hops in the American Northwest. Can you tell your strigs from your bracts, from your bracteoles? Eager to learn about how the rich volcanic soil of the Yakima Valley has made it to the ideal environment for hop growing? Yeah, one mention of the Hop Museum in the back of your dad's sweltering summer road trip RV, and you'll be screaming to see the largest ball of twine in the Cascadia region. But plainness hides strangeness. Secrets are contained in the things that your eyes pass and glaze over. Just down the hall from the statue of Charles Carpenter, the first to promote commercials of the hop growing east of the Cascades, lies a vending machine. It has Coke and Pepsi and everything you expect, with the only oddity that might catch someone's eye being, as the machine had clearly not been replaced since the 70s, as Pepsi still bears its cold, chunky logo. But if you grab the machine at the back in just the right spot and pull, it'll swing back from the wall as light as a feather. And behind it, you'll find a featureless wooden door. If you were to go to all this trouble, you'd be the only person to see my handiwork, besides the clients it's made for. If you looked at the blueprints for the American Hops Museum, should you be for some reason so inclined, you would notice that laws of physics remaining intact, the door ought to lead you to a spot in the parking lot. But if you went ahead and opened the door, you would in fact find a luxury hotel room, or so I've been told. The furnishing of these impossible spaces is usually not part of your contract. I make the space between spaces, the rooms that should not be, and you figure out the Craigslist couch or BDSM equipment as you see fit. This is the work of a crypto architect. We often regard the founder of our field as Sarah Winchester. Her face adorns the first poorly mimeographed page of the Excellence in Cryptography correspondence courses that introduces one to the field. If you have heard of the legendary Winchester Mystery House, you probably know her story. Or at least, you think you do. Supposedly she was haunted by the ghosts of all those killed by her husband's eponymous firearms, that she spent years pouring her fortune into a nonsensical house to appease or escape them. Doors that open to brick walls, stairs that go nowhere, rooms no bigger than a few inches wide. The whole labyrinth had become a tidy little tourist attraction. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. See, Mrs. Winchester lived at the time when folks scoffed at the thought of a woman becoming an architect. Hell, in some of the big firms, you'll still get a couple of derisive snorts if they see someone with 2 X chromosomes mucking around with floor plans and blueprints. So Sarah, discovering something within herself, pioneered our art of making rooms that should not be. Contemporary reports will indicate that the Winchester home remained, to all casual observers, the small farmhouse that Sarah had initially purchased. A far cry from the 4 stories, 40 bedrooms, 17 chimneyed monstrosity that is now a modern attraction. So why now does the building seem to reside in documented and bizarre physical shape, attested to by tens of thousands of tourists? Well, one thing that keeps crypto constructs safe is precisely their impossibility. The ordinary mind, unconditioned to encounter such illogical spaces, will often crack under the pressure and instinctively flee the room while blocking any memory of it having existed. This would be what we might think of as a best-case scenario. A more troublesome contingency is what we in the business call a flytrap. The intruder becomes convinced that the simultaneous feelings of strangeness and familiarity engendered by our spaces make them the only safe place left in a mad outside world. So your wealthy senator client brings his smoke show young mistress to the secret room on floor 8 and a half of the 60-story downtown hotel and finds, not an amorous love nest, but the emaciated corpse of some poor refugee from sanity. It kills the mood and leads to a hell of a customer service complaint. But on rare occasions that crypto constructs are passed through by thousands, like the tourist trap that is the Winchester Mystery House, the psychic weight of so many minds puzzling over the same space will eventually massage it into something real and physical. But once you're skilled and smart enough to avoid pitfalls, it ain't a bad little industry. Raunchy secret liaisons of the wealthy and powerful tend to be my stock in trade. The family values state senator that likes to take his boy toys in the room behind the vending machine in the Hops Museum just got me a nice new beachfront property. Secrecy will always be at a premium, and secrecy paid off my student loans for my naive, abortive attempt to break into the architectural world of the more usual variety. What can I say? I have unusual skill, in high demand, and I've always dreamed of making kill a guy and get away with community service money. And then one day, opportunity came knocking. I got an email from a friend of mine in the industry saying he had just gotten off this incredible job. Easy, shouldn't take more than a few hours, and it was guaranteed big money. So, of course I jumped at the opportunity because I'm nothing if not hungry for a quick buck. He told me he would send them my resume and information, and someone should be in touch shortly. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. Egyptian Embassy, Los Angeles. Tell them that you're with the Department of HSEC. Bathroom cubicle second from right in upstairs office. 8 feet high, 3 feet wide. Length is up to you. Bare concrete. Single bulb. $3 million to complete in 24 hours. I gave my aforementioned acquaintance a quick call to make sure this all sounded right, and he enthusiastically confirmed that everything sounded in order. He sounded a little stung at the fact I had been offered a sum twice what he had received for the job, but his voice also contained a note of excitement. In our tight-knit little industry, any notes of cutthroat competition were dulled by the feeling that we were all pioneers in some strange new art form. The fact that none of us were exactly starving artists helped some. The journey from my home in the Puget Sound area to LA was a fairly uneventful one. Only a sense of paranoia that thrummed in the back of my mind made me occasionally pick out inconspicuous-looking people I suspected of glancing at me a little bit too long. My friend had suggested, and all evidence seemed to indicate, that this was a secretive government job of some kind. Maybe I had just been watching too many 70s spy thrillers, but I kept looking over my shoulder until I got to the embassy. The building was quiet, and as I walked in, I suddenly wondered what it was exactly an embassy did from day to day, having never been inside one. Crazy hand-to-hand combat like in the Bourne movies? As far as I knew, it could very well be the case, but the drab, bureaucratic building was about to see at least a little bit of excitement today, I thought, as I strode up to the counter with my briefcase and neatly pressed suit. I gave my name, and the sweet-looking old lady at the desk blinked in the befuddlement before I added, Homeland Security, and she beamed, gesturing me to a set of stairs behind her desk. I found my way to upstairs bathroom without a problem and feigned a little stage fright at the urinal before the rotund Arab man occupying my workspace had left. As I entered the cubicle, I gagged and muttered some derogatory comment about his diet. I held my breath as I fumbled around the back of the cistern, calming my mind and envisioning a door opening in the white-tiled wall in front of me. Eventually, my grasping found the imperfection that would act as a key, a tiny chip in the back of the cistern. I pressed my finger, squeezing the flesh into the tiny space, and turned it counterclockwise 3 times, visualizing a key turning in a door. Just like that, I was stumbling back as the toilet slid towards me, taking 5 feet of wall with it, and leaving a gap to slip behind. All in all, forming the little room took 2 to 3 hours. The minute dimensions and bare features made it easy enough, and it only took a little massaging and concentrating to get done. But the light bulb was the real trouble. As previously mentioned, I usually tend to leave furnishing to the client themselves, and as for more complex systems like wiring and plumbing, those were definitely a no-go. Without specialist knowledge, making U-bends and earth lines out of sheer thought forms tended to go drastically wrong. I sent a message to my client's number informing them the space was prepared, but lighting would have to be done by someone else. I received a terse reply. Get it done. At a loss, I reached out to a contact of mine in LA. I kept tradesmen that I knew that could keep their mouths shut on hand in a few major cities for just this eventuality. After some confusion at the front desk, I brought my wire-bearing savior into the cubicle and squeezed my eyes tight, twisting at the chip in the back of the cistern. As the wall slid, backlight spilled the color of jaundice onto the tiling. I crouched into the room in confusion. There was now a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling of the concrete den, but it was its companion, casting shivering shadows on the walls, that made my heart rise to my throat. A pair of manacles suspended by chains from the roof, embedded in the concrete. It appeared the furnishing had already begun. As the electrician began to fire questions my way, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it in the dark, and the light bounced off the shaking chains. Asset compromised. Our professional relationship is terminated. Consequences to follow. I caught the last plane back to Seattle just as soon as I could, drinking 3 or 4 Jack and Cokes to calm my nerves. I should have been angry about the broken contract, but the only emotion my fiery gut could summon was pure animal fear. I tried every way I knew how to contact the acquaintance that had put me onto this job in the first place, but all I could get was his voicemail. Eventually, even that was gone, replaced by a dead click and eventually one of those robot voice, out-of-service notifications. I haven't left my house in a week or so. At night, I dream of that little room behind the cubicle in the embassy. A shadowy figure hangs there, and I can see his heartbeat through his chest. I pace the floor of my apartment, desperately begging it to expand. I feel like I can't breathe in here. I tried my front door today, and it wouldn't budge in the slightest, as though something were blocking. I damn near broke my shoulder ramming the damn thing, but it would not budge, despite the fact that it was clearly unlocked. Mind racing, I decided instead to pull, yanking at the silvery handle with all my might. Cold sweat down my back. Eventually the top of the door separated enough from its frame that I was able to yank at it with my fingernails, peeling it back ever so slightly, like I was peeking into a box of Tupperware. Beyond it, I saw a slab of dense concrete wall. My windows will be the next to go. Crypto architecture is a truly amazing industry. To change and conjure spaces, all you need is a defined, unbroken string of thought. Your mind can get lost in a trance, building and reshaping things unconsciously as its forefront is otherwise occupied. You can hypnotize yourself with a racing series of thoughts like a good tale, unaware of your world shifting imperceptibly around you. By the way, when was the last time you pulled your eyes away from the screen? Does something seem off about the familiar place that you're huddled up in right now? Plainness can hide all sorts of strangeness. You might want to try your nearest doorway. Working at a bakery always seemed like a very romantic job. It was the job of choice for many rom-com leading ladies, and romance always seemed to bloom from them with the smell of freshly baked bread in the background. Did I apply for this job because of that? Yes, but don't judge me for it. I'm not actually a baker, but I know my way around a kitchen, and I got hired on as Susan's assistant. At first, waking up at 4 o'clock a.m. to get to the bakery by 4:30 was torture, but my sleep schedule adapted, and the sunrises were beautiful to see. Eventually, I fell into routine, kneading dough and piping icing while the morning stars still twinkled outside. It was one of those things that even once you saw the reality of it, it was still fantastical. We made lavender loaves, wildflower cookies, thyme shortbread cookies, and anything else that struck Susan's fancy in the morning. I stuck around to help cashier and brew coffee for the early crowd, but I was usually out by 10 o'clock. It's a really dedicated early crowd though, and the tips were nice. Sometimes it was cash, but some customers brought us things that they think that we would like. I have gotten wildflowers, shiny stones, vials of stream water, and fresh sunflower seeds placed in the tip jar. I took them all home and set them in my windowsill. There was one weird thing though. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone my name, and we didn't have name tags. Susan said it's because of a past situation where she had a cashier, Nicole, stalked by a crazy customer, and ever since then, she says not to share that much about ourselves with the customers. I had gotten good at shaking off the questions, but smiling and nodding can only get you so far in customer service. So when Nathaniel came in one morning, I accidentally mentioned the neighborhood I lived in when it came up in conversation. He smiled, tipped his hat, and took his rosemary scone to go. I thought that was the end of it, but lately I had been hearing weird things outside my windows at night. Scratchings, kind of. It sounded like what a tree branch scraping on your window would sound like, except there are no trees close to my windows. Regardless, I still came to work every day. Nathaniel has become a regular now. He stays to sip his tea and watch me as I work. It was a little uncomfortable, but kind of flattering. You'd understand if you saw Nathaniel. Well, there's no other word for it than beautiful. His long, dark locks of hair hang easily on his shoulders, and his green eyes seem to shine brighter as the day goes on. His freckles seem to almost dance across the bridge of his nose. That's cheesy, isn't it? I can't help it. He's just ethereal. "Good morning, miss," he said, startling me as I was rearranging the loaves in the window. "Good morning, Nathaniel," I smile. "Would you like a refill on tea?" He grinned and handed his teacup to me, brushing my hand. His hands were surprisingly smooth. It doesn't seem as if he had ever had a hard day's work in his life. I turned to boil some more water for him and set his teacup on the counter. He was still standing there, watching me. I suddenly wished the water would boil faster. I could feel my pulse quickening. It's just so hard to have small talk with customers when you can't say anything about yourself. Maybe that's why I was so nervous. "It's a beautiful morning out, isn't it?" I said. "Oh, yes," he smiled. He knew he had me until the water boiled. "I had a wonderful walk here this morning. The morning dew was always such a nice morning surprise. Sweet, like honey." I couldn't decide if he was just especially pretentious or if he was genuinely someone who drank morning dew. I had had some customers mention it to me before. Maybe it was just something that people did. I personally prefer real honey in my tea, but that's just because I see what my neighbor's dog does to that sweet morning dew. The water seemed to be taking longer than normal to boil. Had I even turned it on? "So," he continued, "what do you do in your free time away from here?" "Oh, this and that," I said, fumbling with the cord. It had somehow fallen away from the wall. Susan came out from the kitchen, still covered in a snow dusting of flour. Her eyes were quick and settled on Nathaniel leaning carelessly against the counter, and me scrambling under the table with the plug. "I'll get some water boiling in the kitchen. Why don't you come with me?" she said to me, more of a command than anything. She filled up an iron saucepan with water and put it on the stove. "Quick and dirty, but it'll do the job." "Are you being careful, Callie?" she said, leaning an elbow against the counter. "You know how important it is for you to follow the rules here." I was baffled. Was I being reamed out about forgetting the plug on the electric tea kettle? Surely she knew it had been a mistake. Sometimes I'm a little slow to things, but she knew I had been trying my best. "Yes, of course. I'm sorry about the kettle. I don't know how." "I mean, are you being careful about yourself?" She cuts me off. "We have a very loyal clientele. Fine folks, but boundaries are important here." I knew that Nicole's disappearance had rattled her. It'd be insane if it didn't. But that was just a one-time crazy incident. The stalker had been arrested and was in a maximum security psych unit. He had never said what happened to Nicole, but she seemed to have vanished without a trace. The police tried to find her, but it was as if she had fallen off the face of the planet. Her stalker was no help either. They interrogated him for days, but he just kept saying she had left to be with family. It was assumed she was dead. Sure, Nathaniel was a little weird in that eclectic artist way, but there was no way he was stalker-murderer level weird. Just weird. "Susan," I said softly, "I'm being careful. I promise nothing is going to happen to me." I took the now boiling water and made Nathaniel's tea. I thought that was going to be the end of it. I really wished it had been. I wish I had listened to Susan. There was so much I didn't know. After that, Nathaniel didn't come around anymore. I started having trouble sleeping though. I thought that waking up every morning so early meant I would sleep like a log at night. But the damn scratching kept me up so late. Work started to get weirder. Susan seemed more cagey, and the clientele seemed less friendly. They still lined up in droves for our scones and pastries, but they felt more like a collective swarm of angry wasps. The energy was frantic, even as they sipped their tea, staring at me from the tables. Complaints started to roll in about me. I wasn't friendly or wasn't customer service oriented. Customers bared their teeth as I forget to say please and thank you. I dodged personal questions without any care or regard for politeness. I could just never sleep. The scratching became so loud at night, I had barricaded myself under my bed. The windows rattled. Sleep seemed to be a thing of the past now. I felt like a zombie dragging myself into work in the morning. I had made my first mistake when I was boiling lingonberries for jam. I nodded off, just for a second, but long enough to spill the jam and get a nasty burn on my hand. Susan sent me home for the day to rest and take care of myself. The bell tinkled above me as I left out the front door to drive home. It was 6:30, which meant customers were getting ready to come in. I smiled and waved at the queue as I made my way to my car. Susan would be okay. She said she was going to call in some help to manage the register while I was out. I was distracted. I bumped into someone on the sidewalk and sent his to-go mug flying. It busted open on my chest and drenched me in dark coffee. "I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, scrambling for the mug. I was positively soaked. There was no amount of bleach that would get this out of my white sweater. "I'm so sorry," he said again. "Please, I have to insist that you let me pay for your dry cleaning. I won't take no for an answer." I was exhausted and not in the mood to argue. Besides, it was my favorite sweater. I tried to push the thought out of my head that technically it was my fault. Well, I guess it was. It felt like 1 second it was free and clear, and then the next second, he had appeared out of nowhere. He had offered a pad of paper for me to put my information on. I wrote down my information, ignoring my aching, burned hand as I spelled out my name and contact information. He took it from me and smiled. "Excellent. I'll be in contact soon, Calliope." "Oh, it's just Callie." I frowned. There was no way I wrote out my actual name. I have always gone by Callie, but maybe he was just one of those weird, pretentious dudes. I waved as I went to my car, desperate to get home and lay my head down on my pillow. I glanced up as I put the car in reverse to back out. The man I had run into had gotten into line outside the bakery. He smiled wolfishly and raised his hand in a wave. I should have known. You never give them your name. My dream job was to work with the national parks. Ever since I was a young boy, I always dreamed of being a park ranger, patrolling campgrounds and chatting with some of the friendly campers, hiking trails to make sure everything was easily maneuverable, and just spending time in nature. Being in nature has always been my way of disconnecting from reality. Whenever things got stressful in life, I would hit the trails, or go backpacking for a few days, or rent a campsite in some remote area in the woods. My parents were never supportive of my goals. They would have much rather seen the letters MD after my name, or my face on a billboard advertising towards people who were involved in traffic collisions. Oh well. I put in an application for one of the county parks near my house, not really expecting much out of it. I was fresh out of high school, no college experience yet, flipping hamburgers and dealing with people who find a reason to complain and everything, so there was no harm at all in putting out applications. I pulled up a Google Map directory of every local state, county, and national park in my state. California, and submitted applications wherever I saw openings. I even called a few parks that I really liked to see if they had any positions available, but hadn't had any luck for months. My bank account was starting to dwindle as a result of constant maintenance on my '03 Civic, which had been put through more than the manufacturers could have ever designed the cars to experience, and I was starting to stress. I would pinch my pennies together at gas stations, skip meals altogether when I didn't have anything readily available at home, and try to cruise 55 on the freeways to be more efficient with what little fuel I had. I definitely didn't expect this to be my reality after high school, but I guess I should have. My parents kicked me out the minute they found out I was gay, and I was left living in my car for months until I found someone who would let me crash on their couch. It was really mentally challenging, just trying to convince myself to keep going through everything, but I had this gut feeling that things would work out eventually. I know it sounds kinda weird, but this life wasn't half bad. I mean, I saved a fair bit of money on rent because Dylan let me sleep on his couch at night for free. I took my Civic with me wherever I drove, to the beaches, the forests, and the mountains east, and deserts. Sleeping in the car wasn't too bad. I wasn't exactly the most picky camper in the world, and knew that it was cheaper than renting a hotel every night. Eventually, I'd have loved to get a van or an SUV to have more room, but for now, the rusty bucket of problems we call a Civic would have to work. I remember the day that I got the email. I had just checked my bank account balance to see that I had $7.80 left. I was a few thousand miles over when I should have gotten my oil changed, and my front brakes were squeaking again, most likely as a result of the axle leaking grease and corroding them. Like I said, rusty bucket of problems. An email was in my inbox that read, National Park Service immediately hiring full-time ranger, must be willing to relocate, base salary $65,000, respond for info. I had never been a religious lad, but this felt like a godsend. I had never seen more than $5,000 in my bank account at one time, let alone $65,000 a year as a base salary. Of course, I had to reply to them and send a message that read, Hi there, I'm Jake, a wilderness enthusiast based in California. I'd love to learn more about your opening with the National Park Service. I am willing to relocate wherever, although it might take time for me to get there. Let me know if you'd like to interview me. I attached a copy of my resume, which had a fair bit of information that would have proved I was the right candidate for the job. Ample experience in the wilderness, knowledge on most survival skills, excellent physical shape, good work ethic. I had beefed up my resume as much as possible. I don't know if I would have been able to forgive myself if they say I was unqualified or didn't get the position. That wouldn't have been an issue though. About 24 hours later, I got a response from a woman by the name of Abigail, inviting me to do a tele-interview a day later. I started to feel giddy with excitement at the prospect of finally landing my dream job with the National Park Service. Not only that, but having accommodation, stable income, and being able to spend time surrounded by the beauty of nature is all I could ask for in life. I set a reminder on my laptop that I had an interview and hastily jotted down the number that she said she would be calling me from. I tried so hard to focus at work that day, but it felt like I was stumbling over orders and making careless mistakes again and again. Every time I slipped up, the manager walked over and yelled at me, then muttered to herself in Spanish and walked away. I was so close to quitting on the spot, but something told me to hold off just a bit longer until I know for sure if I got the new job. Fast forward to the next day. Abigail called me about 5 minutes late. She asked me pretty basic questions, my past work experience, my work ethic, asked me to describe some of the experience I have had in the wilderness, and what knowledge I can bring to the team. I answered her questions honestly and very thoughtfully, making sure to reference real-world scenarios whenever possible so she didn't think I was bluffing with all the experience that I claimed to have. It seemed to be going great, and I was certain I would get the position. I was smiling wider than I'd smiled in months when she asked me the question that sticks with me to this day. Are you afraid of what lurks in the shadows of the trees at night, Jake? It took me a minute to figure out how to respond to this. I didn't expect her to ask me that. When I was going over interview questions the night before, I planned just about everything out, even some follow-up questions to ask her about the position that would show how interested I am. I had not prepared for this. I had never been afraid of the woods or any nature at all. I had no reason to be. I knew everything there was to know about defending myself. I could use a knife pretty well, was a great aim with a crossbow, and had even made my own bows before out of materials in the woods. I didn't exactly believe in supernatural beings or demonic entities, so there was no reason to be afraid. Still, her question unsettled me a little bit. I tried to convince myself that it was just a joke and she wasn't serious, but the lack of laughter matching my nervous laughter shot that theory down pretty quickly. I took a deep breath and then responded, I've never been afraid of the shadows in the trees. I do just fine in the wilderness and have never been in a situation where I feel like I lost control. Her response sent chills up my spine. I reckon you should be, honey. She's always watching, even if it feels like she left. No matter how far you go, she'll always be a few steps behind you. She's always smiling, too. If you dare ignore. Abigail cut off as she began talking to someone else on her end of the line, assumingly a coworker or another park ranger. She eventually put herself on mute, and I spent a few minutes processing what had happened. Who is she? What happens if you ignore her? I felt a bit uneasy, but then realized that Abigail works with the parks. I feel like to work with the NPS, you have to be at least a bit crazy. Not many people would want to give up the luxuries of fast internet, guaranteed electricity, and a healthy social life to live alone in the middle of the woods, patrolling and yelling at people who started fires outside of fire pits. Even if you weren't crazy getting in, chances are by the time you retire, you'll have a therapist on speed dial. I tried to chalk it up to being that, an older lady who was starting to lose her mind, and brushed it off as no big deal. Just as I came to my conclusion, I heard Abigail's voice on the other end of the line again. Congratulations, Jake. You're perfect for the position. We're going to send you a ticket for your plane that'll be embarking to Alaska to start in Denali National Park in 3 days. Do you have any more questions? I froze for a minute. I was going to Alaska in 3 days. This moment was honestly the happiest of my life thus far. The realization that everything I had dreamed of was starting to fall into place. I was likely going to be surrounded by millions of trees, millions of acres of land, and one of the most beautiful landscapes the world has to offer. It had been my dream to visit Alaska one day, and now I got to live there and get paid to do so. But I had to find out more. I wanted to know what she meant earlier about the girl who watches you. Even though I'm almost positive it was nothing, I wanted to hear it from her, just to ease my racing mind. I decided to start with a pretty general question. What should I bring with me? I asked. She responded quickly. Just your clothing and anything you might want in your station. Phone, laptop, and charger, winter clothing, a few decorations or memories from home, any other weird gadgets you love, and maybe a pocket knife. We'll provide everything else you need. I didn't exactly have a lot to my name, aside from my car and a few boxes of crap that I had collected over the years, so I figured I would pack light. I had to do a bit of shopping for winter clothing, as it's never cold enough to warrant heavy jackets in Southern California, but that would be a lot easier when I had the couple $100 my car was worth in pocket. I felt like we were comfortable enough with each other, so I asked the question. You said something earlier about a woman who watches you? I asked hesitantly, half expecting her to hang up on me and deny me the job right then and there, but she chuckled and responded, Oh, sorry about that. Sometimes my brain acts all wonky with these interviews. She cleared her throat and continued. It was just one of those moments, nothing to be afraid about. That explanation resonated with me, and I thanked her for her time and hung up. I could hardly sleep at night. Anticipation for my flight and vivid dreams about the forests, the wildlife, and life as a ranger filled my thoughts constantly. One night it got so hard I had to take Benadryl just to make myself drowsy enough to get a few hours of shut-eye. It was the day of the flight. Dylan helped me with my bags and drove me to the airport. I decided I would give him the rest of the money I had, as I was sure there wouldn't be any convenience stores where I was heading, and left him everything I couldn't take with me. I don't know if he was just taking it so I didn't have to lug it down to Goodwill or deal with the horror commonly known as Facebook Marketplace, but I appreciated it either way. I entered the terminal, scanned my boarding pass, and checked my duffel bags, and carried a pack with me that had all my technology, crappy point-and-shoot camera I had saved for years, my laptop, cell phone with contacts of the few people I wanted to remain close with, and a few notebooks because I love writing. Of course, I had all my hiking gear packed, even though they said they would provide me with gear of my own when I got there. It was too difficult to part with these shoes and poles and things that had kept me going for so many years when I had nothing else to look forward to. I boarded my plane, threw my backpack in the overhead stowaway bin, and prepared for takeoff. This was it. The moment that my entire life's hoping and working had culminated into. Every struggle I had, every moment of doubt whether I wanted to keep pushing on through the poverty and pain was gone. My dreams were about to become a reality. I braced myself for takeoff and shut my eyes to get a little bit of rest while the plane began its 6-hour journey towards Alaska. The plane touched down at Anchorage International, and it would be a short drive to get to the park where I would be stationed. I was greeted by a friendly face who I assumed to be Abigail. She was a frail woman, most likely in her late 50s, but had this fire in her eyes. She didn't look tough, but I had to assume she was a lot stronger than her appearance put on. Behind her was a man, about my height and a little more muscular. I assumed he would be training me or working with me at my post. Neither of them said much, other than exchanging basic pleasantries, and I was instructed to follow her to the van that they had arranged for transportation. The minute I stepped foot out of the airport, I was in shock. Alaska was absolutely beautiful. I had seen pictures of it before, watched a few shows on television when I used to have cable, and of course seen plenty of YouTube videos that people put out there, but it's just so much more incredible in person. The trees in the distance, the chilly air that just felt so much fresher than the city air, the dynamic of people in the area all felt so surreal. It truly felt like home. Home. Something I really needed at that point in my life. We got in the van, a small white Transit that definitely showed some signs of use, and headed north towards Denali National Park. I sat next to the muscular man whose name I learned to be Zeke. Abigail had left a bit earlier. I guess it was just me and Zeke right now, and the person driving the van, who had a weird love for classical music. I put one of my earbuds in, knowing that I probably wouldn't get a lot of time to listen to music during orientation, and enjoyed the drive as the sun started to sleepily duck down under the huge snow-capped mountains to my right. Eventually, we got to the ranger station. It was a small building, but from the outside, it looked very inviting. The walls were made of wood, and the lights had a yellowish glow to them. There were windows on all sides, and a little check-in desk for those who were driving through. Surrounding the ranger station were towering green trees, which I recognized to be primarily white spruce, and to the left a bit, there was a building that looked like some form of bathroom connected to a garage. I had gotten to know Zeke a bit on the ride up. He was pretty quiet, but we had a lot of similarities. He was only a few years older than I was, and had also been kicked out of his house by his family, although he wouldn't tell me why. Zeke grew up in Montana, in a small town near Glacier National Park and fell in love with the surroundings. He told me he had been working for the national parks for a year now and was bumped up to one of the lead positions at Denali. I really felt like I could get along with Zeke, although there was something a bit off about him. It felt like he was hiding something. It had to have been the voice. It sounded as if there was some underlying fear or anxiety in his tone. Oh well, he seemed to be a really good person, and I'd be working with him indefinitely, so there was an obligation to get along to some extent. If something happened to one of us, we had to be able to depend on the other for help. I wasn't used to this, and I knew it wouldn't come as easy as the textbooks make it feel, but it was something I could work towards. As the van pulled up to the garage next to the facilities, I motioned to get out, but Zeke reached over me and pulled the door shut once more. "You're not stopping here," he said with a grin. "You'll be stationed in a tower about 5 miles north in the forests. Everything you need should be there: a hunting rifle, clothing, gear, your phone, and the numbers that you may need to call, and a handbook with all the information that you'll need for now." He paused for a moment, then continued. "I know it sounds silly, but make sure you read every page in the handbook. It's not that long, and the last guy who didn't." I could see a look of regret on Zeke's face as he realized that he had shared too much. He had to be replaced somehow, and that's why you're here. It must have been evident that I had a look of shock on my face. I wish I had known this before I signed up for the position, but I guess it made sense. You're working in a remote area in the wilderness. All kinds of wildlife could cut your life short. If you don't know everything there is to know about the area, you could be caught with your pants down, with a hungry bear looking right up at you, so to speak. I smiled and said, "I'll read it all, don't worry." The expression on his face appeared genuine, and Zeke waved as he jumped out of the van and headed towards the ranger station. I adjusted around a bit and put my feet up against the vacant left side of the van. The driver didn't say a thing and kept on driving. As the forest got denser and denser, the road felt bumpier and bumpier. Even though it didn't exactly feel like a God-sent cab ride, I felt like I was in heaven, surrounded by trees, people who also loved nature, and I was making more money doing this than I would have made in 3 years at McDonald's. Maybe this is the closest to heaven I'll ever be. Just as I was starting to drift into sleep, I saw a huge tower in the distance. It was probably 85 feet tall and had a metal staircase that wrapped around the tower frame and led into a cabin, supposedly where I was to sleep and watch from. The driver pulled off a bit, got out of the car, and opened my door. I jumped out as well and gave my legs a moment to adjust to standing up again after hours of riding in a bumpy van. "Here you are, lad. You got about a 1/4 mile walk to the tower, through the forest to the right." He motioned his arm towards a huge expanse of trees that was surrounding the tower. It appeared as if some of the trees were taller than the tower itself. It was absolutely beautiful. I thanked him, shook his hand, put my gloves on, and began the hike towards my new home. The tower itself was amazing. It looked relatively new. The only evidence that anyone had lived in it before were the footprints gathered around the base of the steps. As I ascended the metal staircase that led into the sky, I couldn't help but gawk at the beautiful expanse of forest that surrounded me. For miles and miles, all I could see were towering trees, mountains, and there was a small lake a bit to the west. Considering the only light that was guiding me at this point was that from the full moon and the stars that shone in the sky, it was amazing how well I could see. It was such a contrast from the mundane city views that I had grown to abhor, and beat any hike or backpacking trip I had ever done by a long shot. A bright orange light helped me find the door. There were windows on 3 of the 4 sides of the tower, the 4th being the wall my bed was up against. When I entered this small cabin, there was a gunmetal filing cabinet and a metal desk right next to the bed, and a locker which I presumed to hold all of my new belongings and the rifle. Around the unit were posters from various parks in Alaska, a few pictures of the staff team, and little notes about things you can see from each window. On the wooden desk was a handbook, assumingly the one I was informed about earlier. There was a black phone connected to a landline and a little memo pad that was turned upside down. I spent a few hours reading the handbook. Nothing out of the ordinary. It outlined what I was supposed to be doing, some of the standard operating procedures for common events, and gave me a breakdown of the wildlife and the plants that I would likely encounter. There was a map on one of the last pages that showed my tower in relation to the other towers throughout the park and the headquarters Zeke got dropped off at. For the most part, I was just fire watch and patrolling for now. Every 2 days, I would hike a trail nearby my station and make sure that no fallen logs or huge grizzly corpses stopped trekkers and trucks from exploring the park. There was a page that detailed some of the things more experienced rangers got to do. Experiments with local research teams, assessing weather conditions, tagging and tracking animals through the forests, and cutting unhealthy trees into firewood to be used at the ranger station and sold in the nearest town to benefit the forest. I assumed that there would be tours as well, but no mention of those was in the handbook. I was about to turn away when I remembered that there was a little memo pad right next to me. It looked pretty worn down. The cover was entirely faded when I turned it over, except for big words on the front that read, 5 most important things. I assumed that it was general notes on things that were happening nearby in real time. The handbook was likely a bit outdated, and the notebook allowed rangers to write down what was happening and leave reminders on current events that any new hirees would need to know. But when I flipped to the first page, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine through my body. In chicken scratch handwriting it read, Number 1. You work alone. I glanced around the room and didn't see anyone else with me. I figured that I would be working alone when I got to the park and Zeke got out, but it felt so dark. The writing felt like it was written as a warning of sorts, in case somebody else tried to pretend they worked there. Is it possible that some of the local backpackers tried to pretend to work with the parks in order to steal, or worse? I flipped the page, and once again, that shiver ran down my spine as I read the handwritten words. Number 2. She will not help you. I flipped the page again, anxiously glancing around the room, trying to figure out who she was. Number 3. If you hear her crying, run. I practically ripped the page off the memo pad as I flipped again to see what was on the following page. Number 4. If you see her, it's too late. I slammed the book against the counter and started pacing around the room. I knew that I was getting myself into a job that could be dangerous, but who was she? What kind of tasks was I really doing here, aside from watching for fires and hiking trails? I really wanted to know more, and soon. But I was starting to get tired and wouldn't be able to get very far with the intense jet lag and the lack of sleep recently. I took off my shirt and boots. I set my backpack down next to the cot that I had been sleeping in. It was actually quite comfortable, at least, more comfortable than sleeping on a couch had been. I decided to sleep with a utility belt on, knife, flashlight, and an FN-57 pistol that I'd found in the locker, just in case. All of this would blow over in the morning when I got answers, I'm sure. At least, that's what I told myself as I tossed and turned in bed for 20 minutes, trying to calm my nerves. I awoke to the sound of rain pattering against the roof of the tower. Great, I thought. I won't be able to hike down to the station in this weather. I got up, cleared my eyes, blew my nose, and looked out the window. There was a heavy fog surrounding the tower, and I could barely see the trees closest to me, let alone the lake or the ranger station. I decided to look through the handbook one last time and see if I could find any phone numbers to the ranger station. When I looked through the night before, I found no mention of the phone at all. and no idea how to reach others in case of emergencies. I guess it's very possible that I was too groggy and missed a key detail. I started walking towards the wooden desk when I froze. Someone was coming up my tower. I instinctively put my hand on my hip where my 5.7 was stored and was ready to pull it out and fire. Just as I started to raise the gun, I saw a young woman's face in the window. She was wearing typical ranger attire, a heavy snow jacket, cargo pants, heavy boots. She had a utility belt on as well, with a knife and a gun similar to mine on her waist. I, laughing at my stupidity for almost killing a fellow ranger, put the gun back in its holster and opened the door. "Hi, I'm Autumn. I just wanted to say hi to the new guy." She blushed and pointed out through my window towards where my entrance to the park would have been. "Most of the times, you can find me at the main headquarters. Sometimes I like to work with the new recruits until they're comfortable with their duties. If you want, I can take you on a little tour when the weather clears up a bit." She was soaking wet. Her hair looked fresh out of the shower. She had to have trekked at least 5 miles to get here, through heavy rain and terrible conditions. There was no way I would say no to letting her stay a bit. Plus, it was starting to get colder. If she got caught out while it was snowing with soaked clothing, chances are it wouldn't end well. "You can stay here for a bit if you like. I just woke up a few minutes ago. I was looking for a manual on how to use the phone because I had a couple questions. I can't find any phone numbers or any information about how to contact headquarters," I said, pointing towards the phone. She chuckled and replied, "Oh, those phones don't work. They're really just an aesthetic at this point. The lines used to be up and running, but now they're good as dead. You'd have to walk down to the headquarters to ask, but since I'm here, you may as well ask me." I felt embarrassed to ask about the notes in the notepad, so I quickly put together a random thought. What do we do about getting food here? Do they do supply runs to resupply the towers, or do you have to walk to pick up your own? I mean, it wasn't a bad question at all. Besides, I was getting hungry and couldn't find any food around the room. "They'll bring it by in a few hours," she said, smiling. "It's not exactly what I would call comfort food, but it fills the stomach and gives you the energy you need to keep trekking." I smiled, thinking back to all the times that I had gone hungry because I couldn't afford to eat. I wasn't eager to tell Autumn my entire life story, so I stayed silent, but the prospect of getting food handed to me, and decent livable food, made me livid with excitement. "By the way, HQ told me to tell you that there was an incident on one of the trails not too far from here. Since it's in your territory, they wanted you to check it out. Something about a boulder that's obstructing the path. I guess it's become dislodged with the rain and rolled down the hill." I didn't realize how long it had been raining. I guess it had to have started while I was sleeping, since there was a steady pour by the time I awoke. "I'll check it out when the weather clears up. Do you know where it is?" "It's west of here. If you look on the map in your handbook, you'll see a trail called Boulder Ridge Loop. It's a 7-mile loop trail that goes around a mountain." I laughed. Ironic, huh? The boulder destroyed the Boulder Ridge Loop. "Do you know exactly how much more rain we're going to get tonight?" She shook her head. "Not sure, to be honest. Chances are it'll get light for a few hours, then start raining pretty heavily again. If I were you when it starts to ease, I would head out as fast as you can and try to assess what happened." She paused for a moment and then continued, "I'd be more than happy to tag along if you'd like the company, to help. Plus, it might be difficult to determine the trailheads on your first full day." "Yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to get changed and start getting ready so we can leave in an instant." She started walking towards the door and said, "I'll wait near the trailhead. Don't dilly-dally too long, buddy." She gave me a friendly wave and jogged down the metal steps. Autumn seemed like a nice person. She was pretty attractive, friendly, and seemed knowledgeable. I put on a heavy rain jacket that was in my locker when I realized something. I sprinted over to the desk and grabbed the memo pad. Turning back to page 1, I traced the scratched letters with my fingertip. Number 1, you work alone. I flipped the page again. Number 2, she will not help you. I started to panic. I couldn't go out with her. I had already broken 2 of the rules that were in the memo pad. There was no way for me to reach the ranger station to ask them for clarification. I tried to be rational. Maybe she doesn't work with me, and she's just telling me my duties, I thought, trying to alleviate the anxiety from my mind, but it didn't help at all. I spent an hour pacing back and forth until I noticed that the rain had started to lighten up. I began to pace faster and faster, looking through drawer upon drawer, trying to find something that could help me. Maybe a mobile phone, or a map so I could find the trail myself, or keys to some truck that was out of plain sight nearby. I couldn't find anything. Hours and hours passed until I noticed that the sky was getting darker and darker. God damn it, I thought to myself. I didn't get a chance to do anything today except worry. I turned the light on with the switch in the cabin and went back over to look through the handbook, once again hoping that I missed something that would help me in this situation, but I found nothing new. I looked outside and could see nothing once again. There was a heavy fog all around the tower, and it was pitch black out. It must have been at least 10 p.m. I was considering calling it a night and trying to get some sleep when I heard a faint voice call out from the bottom of the tower. "Hey, are you coming?" Oh God, she's back, I thought to myself. I had the pistol on my waist, but grabbed a hunting rifle. Something was very off about this place, about Autumn. At first, I thought I could trust her, but at this point, I didn't know if I could trust anybody. I started to crawl slowly towards the door. I put my back against the thin frame of the metal that separated the door and the wide glass window and peered out. I saw Autumn standing at the base of the tower, staring up at me. Her eyes were wide as saucers, and she was smiling. Not your typical smile. This smile was dark, twisted, scary. It didn't quiver one bit, and she didn't lose her gaze once, even when I looked away. "Hello," I heard her call out. I peeked again, and she was now looking to the left, no longer right at me. I reached for the door and slowly creaked it open when I heard it. I heard her begin wailing. Not your typical, I stubbed my toe on a coffee table wail. Her screams were piercing. It was impossible to think straight. Even the constant pour of rain couldn't drown out her wailing. I remembered the 3rd number in the memo pad and began to shake. Number 3. If you hear her crying, run. I swung open the door and started to run down when her gaze immediately locked onto me. Her eyes had turned pure white, and she immediately stopped wailing and smiled once more. Saliva dripped down from her teeth, and she began to laugh as she locked her eyes with mine. And if that wasn't bad enough, blood began to pour out of her eyes. I'm not talking a little bit. It was running down her face and collecting in the collar of her ranger jacket. Her once beautiful hair was beginning to fall out by the second, and she began to tremble uncontrollably, as if she was about to explode. Number 4. If she sees you, it's too late. In a split second, I drew my hunting rifle. She began to sprint up the stairs, faster than any animal I had ever encountered. Her steps were effortless and didn't stumble one bit. I immediately aimed at her and fired. A bullet hit her right in the chest, and I saw her smiling corpse fall through the cracks between the metal steps. A pool of blood erupted from her body, and she lay motionless. I sprinted back into the tower, leaving my rifle on the deck, and slammed the door shut. With all the strength I had left, I pushed a filing cabinet against the metal cabin door and immediately collapsed against the cold metal as I listened to the rain drum against the roof of my tower. I was in shock, drained, exhausted, confused, and afraid. I don't know what that thing was, but it would bother me no more. I felt a wave of relief rush over me. All I had to do was make it to morning. I could get to the ranger headquarters and get the hell out of this place, out of this cursed forest, out of this crappy metal tower, away from this demonic creature that called itself Autumn. That brings us to the present moment. I'm sitting here, phone in my hand, writing this up on my notepad app. However, I just need to check something. I remembered the title of the memo pad said that there weren't 4 things, but 5. I glanced over at the title of the memo pad. As I expected, it read, 5 most important things. I thumbed through the pages. Number 1, you work alone. Number 2, she will not help you. Number 3, if you hear her crying, run. Number 4, if she sees you, it's too late. I paused for a moment, then turned the page once more. Simultaneously, as I turned the page, I heard that familiar pounding of feet sprinting up the stairs, heavy feet, and the sobbing was back, somehow twice as loud as it was before. I looked at the words on page 5 and dropped the memo pad to the floor in fear. Number 5. Do not try to kill her under any condition. She does not die. The club, I thought, was just another unremarkable, if weird, place that I would forget about the next day. It seemed so familiar, and the people seemed so typical. The ecstasy ran its course, took hold, and eventually, the sun would come up and the people would come down. When I first saw it, there wasn't one iota of me that thought that this particular building, location really, would become the central focus of my life for the better part of a week. It all happened in the summer of 2005, in a fairly small town of about 25,000 people, somewhere in New England. I haven't talked about it since then, because I'm the only person who remembers it, the only one who was chosen by this piece of land to tell its story. Here's how it started. I and 2 friends were out driving around on an unusually warm night. We spotted the club and decided to go in, have a few drinks, enjoy the music. We walked in and were immediately greeted by blaring music so loud the servers could barely hear our orders. I also took notice of a DJ, tall, at least 6'4", with a tattoo on his hand that looked like a scorpion, and another on his knuckles that read, Trap. My friends and I mocked the club for being too cliché, and as techno music played, and glow sticks swirled sickeningly, I started to feel nauseous, and my head began to pound. The DJ shouted, "This next one's straight from the heart," and began spinning the discs like a madman. I ran to the bathroom to puke, pushing my way through a horde of young people my age. Once in the bathroom, I flung the stall door open and projectile vomited into the toilet 2 or 3 times. And when I went to clean myself up and splash some water on my face, I noticed that someone had written, "I want to leave so bad," in what looked like blood. This didn't totally freak me out. It wasn't the weirdest thing I had seen at a rave, or even in a bathroom for that matter, so I mostly dismissed it as the drug-fueled confusion of an angsty teen. Back out in the main room of the club, I told my friends I thought we should go, that I wasn't feeling well, and that the club had a creepy vibe. They wanted to stay though, and so I told them I would meet them outside. I walked out back behind the club, pulled a cigarette out of the pack, and began to smoke it, slowly, when I suddenly noticed a large shadow lurching towards me, limping. "Who's there?" I asked, not too concerned, but I got no answer. I asked again, but then the shadow hobbled away, and I assumed it was some kid on drugs having a bad trip, until I heard it retching around the corner, making noises that sounded completely inhuman. It thrashed around, knocking into the trash cans and slamming into a car that was parked on the side of the building. This freaked me out, and I ran around the other side of the building so as to avoid it and back inside the club. Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics was pounding over the stereo at that point, as the DJ was nowhere to be seen. I was totally out of breath and completely scared. I finally found my friends sitting at the bar, totally hammered, and they asked me if McDonald's was still open. I finally convinced them to leave, but before we could, a woman with dark red hair stopped us at the door and said, "Thank you for coming. Please come again," before stamping our hands with a barcode. I found it weird, but just wanted to get the hell out of there and not think about the place again. In the car, my friends were way too drunk to talk to them about the things I experienced at the club, so I just kept it to myself, convinced myself that it was nothing to worry about, and just drove us home, back to our respective houses. For some reason, the next day, I had to see the club again. I had to see it in broad daylight. I also had to face it alone, without my friends. There was a sort of peace of mind that I needed. Closure even, just to see that the club was what I thought it was. Totally and completely unremarkable. Harmless. Just another place, and nothing more. I had forced myself to believe that if I saw it in its most harmless state, during the day, that I would be able to forget about it. The sound the shadow made as it retched and gagged kept reverberating in my head, and my nausea would return whenever I thought about it, which was almost constantly, even in my dreams that early morning when I finally got home and collapsed into bed. The location of the building was very inconspicuous, and I had a bit of trouble finding it again. It sat near railroad tracks, the same tracks I had grown up hearing the roar of the trains down every night. Eventually, I remembered how we found the club the first time, and I followed the tracks down a dirt road and onto gravel, until finally I could see the neon glow of the building. However, when I reached the exact spot the club was at last night, I instead found myself outside of a grocery store. The store was an exact replica from the outside of my local store that I had been going to since I was a small child. "You'll never want to leave," a sign said in bold green lettering, glowing so bright I couldn't look at it for too long. I got out of my car and considered all of the possibilities. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I was on an acid trip and I never even left the club. But there was no logical explanation. The grocery store was supposed to be at least 7 miles in the opposite direction, nowhere near train tracks. I leaned up against my car and stared at the store for what seemed like forever. I briefly considered calling one of my friends from the night before, but it seemed useless. They were too drunk to know where they were last night. I decided to just walk in. When I entered, it was déjà vu. The store was the same on the inside as my local grocery store, and the shoppers there didn't seem to notice. Maybe they just didn't know. I walked around aimlessly for a bit, completely dumbfounded as to what was going on in my town. I decided to buy something, a pack of gum, $1. And before I checked out, I went to the bathroom to make sure nobody had written any ominous messages on the mirror. But unlike the club, the store's bathroom was completely clean. Not a blemish. No blood. When I got to the checkout counter, I vaguely recognized the cashier. I paid for the gum and asked him how long the store had been at this location. I don't know. A while, I guess," was all he said. His eyes were dark and gloomy, and I couldn't see any emotion in them. I was about to walk away when I noticed his tattoos. A scorpion on his hand and the word trap on his knuckles. I stopped, looked around as if I was expecting someone or something to jump out and attack me. The lights above our heads hummed. Music faintly played over the radio. Didn't I see you at the club last night?" I asked. "Weren't you the DJ?" "Yeah, I do that too," he said with a laugh that made me uncomfortable, and he just kept staring at me with an emotionless smile. "Have a good day," my voice trailed off. "Yeah, bro, but it's nighttime," he said. I ran out of the store and sure enough, it was nighttime, black as a crow. I moved to my car, threw the pack of gum on the passenger seat, and looked back at the store. The neon light emanating from it was now unbearable, and the bright green sign that once read, "You'll never want to leave," had been changed to, "I want to leave so bad." At this point, I was completely sure that I had either lost my mind entirely or that something terrifying was happening. I remember researching for hours on the internet all the different possibilities: string theory, mental illness, the effect drugs can have on the human psyche, shapeshifters, and skinwalkers. Everything. Nothing made sense. No one theory fits a narrative. Nothing I researched or had ever heard about up until this time was the piece of this cosmic puzzle that I was looking for. This is the part where I have a hard time discerning reality from fantasy. The messed up places my mind took me while I slept. What I do remember is that around 2:00 a.m. the next night, I had drank enough to gain the courage to drive back to the building. By this time, I knew where it was located by heart. The train tracks looked more ominous to me now. My stomach dropped when I saw them, and I wanted to turn back and forget about all of this. But something propelled me forward, and I continued to follow the tracks, drunk, driving too fast, more scared of a building than getting pulled over. At least I knew jail was real, and I could feel the bass from the back of my car pounding against my seat as the full moon briefly blinded me and then hid behind the trees just as I pulled up to the exact location of what was a grocery store the last time I saw it. What stood now was a beautiful house. Large glass windows made for natural lighting allowed me to see a packed party full of people dancing and screaming and doing drugs. And I swear I heard someone shout, "He's here!" But it could have been just my imagination. I again stepped out of my car and leaned against it. I stared at the house party waiting for someone to greet me, or at least acknowledge me. I pulled a couple of shooters of whiskey from my pocket and downed them quickly before marching forward with a false sense of confidence that the voice in the back of my head told me I would regret. I tried to open the door, but it was locked, so I pounded on it and screamed for somebody to let me in. But I only saw shadows float by in the windows. I decided to walk around the back and see if I could get in that way. And then I heard that sound again. It stopped me dead in my tracks and sobered me immediately. It retched, chalked, gagged, screamed, puked, coughed, barked, howled, and struggled to swallow something. It sounded panicked, like it was dying. I turned around and saw its eyes, yellow like the moon and bright as a bonfire. It looked at me with fear and confusion as it began pulling the thing it was trying to swallow whole back from out of its throat. It stood tall, too tall for a normal man, about 8 feet. Its knees were all bent backward and its face was sickeningly malformed. Its flesh was rotting and its smell turned my stomach. Its mouth gaped like a black hole. Its arms were twice as long as its legs. I realized then that the thing I was locking eyes with was the same thing I heard, and that's the shadow I saw 2 nights prior at the club. It continued to regurgitate what it had swallowed in a morbid, vile manner. It was a girl, my age, that it had swallowed. After it spit her back out, it grunted, puked, and fled into the bushes a few feet away from where it stood. I asked the girl if she was okay, but she only laughed, and her eyes were the same grotesque yellow as the thing that ate her and then hacked her back up in the yard. Her laughter freaked me out, and as I was about to leave, the slider door opened. A man in a Jason Voorhees mask had flung it open and then pulled me into the party, where a song had just started playing and everyone was wearing shirts that said, "I want to leave so bad." But they were all smiling and the music was distorted, and I regretted ever showing up. And then I saw the DJ again, same tattoos as before. "We have a guest," he shouted through a microphone over the already oppressively loud music. Everyone turned to me, still smiling. I tried to turn back and leave through the slider door I was pulled in through, but when I turned, the thing was standing right outside of it, banging on it, yellow eyes peering right at me, crying, begging to be let in. I turned back around and pushed my way through the sea of young people partying. I recognized some of their faces. Some of them I went to school with. "Relax," someone shouted at me. "Let him leave," the DJ screamed. "He'll be back." I finally reached the front door. I opened it and immediately heard the sound of the thing still pounding on the slider door from the backyard. Its cries spurred me on as I ran to my car and drove away. So, if I have to be honest, and I wish I didn't, I spent the next 3 days drinking and getting high and trying to forget about the location. I had pretty much accepted that something completely out of my control was going on, and I didn't think going back was worth the risk. I fell asleep one night, high on anti-anxiety medication, and not entirely sure that the feeling of euphoria the drugs were giving me wasn't just another false hope in that chaotic time. I remember waking up and falling back asleep. Rhythmically, every now and then, I would wake and drift back off to dreamland. At some point, though, I woke up to the feeling of motion. I was moving, and I wasn't entirely sure why, but I figured it was the Xanax making me feel that way. I didn't think anything of it until I heard the sound of a train whistle and the roar of the wheels against the tracks. I jumped out of what I thought was my bed, but was by now just a cabin on a train. I fell to the floor and shouted, "Where the hell am I?" The train halted, and I looked out my window. I was pretty sure that the train had stopped at the location. The club, the grocery store, the house party, all were gone. What stood now was absolutely nothing but a graveyard. Thousands of headstones and memorials stretched across the land. I ran the length of the train and forced the door open and stepped out. I cautiously entered the graveyard, certain that at any moment the dead would shoot up from the ground and drag me under with them. What actually happened shook me to my core. The first thing I noticed was a shadow. Its shadow, off in the distance, 50 to 60 yards off. It was, as usual, grunting, and it briefly looked at me, and I saw its disgusting yellow eyes again, even from so far away, and I realized it was eating something, and I assumed it was a person. "What do you want from me?" I called out. Being eaten by the thing didn't seem so bad anymore. "Why are you torturing me?" I walked forward, ready to possibly confront the thing, and maybe the DJ if he was there as well, which I assumed he was. Before I could reach the beast, I was stopped in my tracks by a voice from behind. "Just make sure they know," the voice said. "Know what?" I asked as I whirled around. The DJ was standing there, face all distorted and tattooed now. "What do you want me to tell who?" I demanded, and a tear streamed down my now shallow and sunken cheeks. "There is nothing to fear. You were never happy. Nobody is," the DJ said as he sat on one of the tombstones. "Whatever happens to you and yours, it was always going to happen. That thing back there, eating people, it's not so bad. People eat people all the time." The DJ looked down and opened his jacket, revealing his ribs and organs. "I don't understand," was all I could mutter. "It doesn't matter. You aren't good enough. Nobody is. Your fate, like everyone else's, will be the same as mine," he said, and gestured at his rotting, distorted body. I looked back at the thing, and it was gone. And when I looked back at the DJ, he was gone too. And I slowly walked over to where the thing had been eating, and whatever or whomever it was eating was now gone as well, and I felt like the whole situation was gone. I looked over now at where the train had pulled up, and now only saw the railroad tracks. And by the tracks on the road, I saw my car parked, door open, lights on. I started towards my car, and as I walked, I finally noticed what the tombstones all read. I want to leave so bad. I got in my car and followed the tracks back to my house, and not long after I graduated college with a degree in archaeology. I think about these events every day of my life and the effects they had on me. I feel now is the time to write this story as an exorcism of sorts. All I have to say about the situation is what I saw. I can only relay the facts. The interpretation is up to you. My local pub is over 140 years old. I have been buying pints there ever since I was legal, or thereabouts. Hell, Jim's family has owned the pub for 5 generations. If anyone can judge whether you can handle a beer, it's Jim. No one really cares around here anyway. It's a small village in the country where everyone knows each other's business, but no one tells the coppers. Looking back, maybe that's where the trouble really began. The secrets, the silence. Like I said, it's my local. I pop in most nights for one on my way home, or I used to, before the accident. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Since the crash, I find it difficult to hold on to a train of thought for too long before it pulls away from me and I'm left there, sitting on the platform, just watching the empty tracks. I need to start from the beginning, if not for myself, for you. This needs to end here. So I head in there on Friday, as usual, propping up my end of the bar, as normal. I'm driving, so only have the one. I'm sure of that. Very sure. The police refused to believe me, of course, insisting I must have been well over the limit, and the hospital's test wasn't accurate. I had lost too much blood by then. Anyway, that's not important. Not really. I know I've never been drunk enough to imagine something like this. I walked out of the pub. It was about 6:30 p.m., and the sky was a golden red where I could see it elbowing its way through the trees. Though it was the evening, I could remember thinking how calm and warm it was, and that it should be a nice day on Saturday. Too busy thinking about the future, I didn't realize that my present wasn't so much a gift as a nightmare waiting to wrap me up. I rolled down the windows as soon as I got into my car. It was a banger, so if I didn't want to overheat quicker than the engine, it was necessary. One of the nurses said it was probably what saved my life. Less glass in the wounds. He was wrong, but I appreciated the sentiment. I also heard one of the nurses in the hospital confirm to the cops that I had been wearing a seatbelt. I think that's when they were trying the attempted suicide angle. Funny how coppers hear hooves and think zebras. I pulled the car out of the pub car park, easing it onto the country roads. I don't speed on the back roads where I live. The hedges are mostly granite under the bushes, so any kid that grew up here knows better. Even the police had to admit the brake marks on the road confirmed I was only doing between 20 and 26 miles per hour, max, when I swerved. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, no matter how many times I tell this story. And trust me, that's a lot by the time you count the police, the doctors, the nurses, the psychiatrists, every single one of them wanting to hear it over and over and over again. And I know how it sounds. Honestly, I do. I get it. If I had heard the story a few months ago, sitting in my local, I'd have laughed and offered to buy the teller a pint for the entertainment. So anyway, there I was, driving down the back roads heading home. It's a 10-minute journey at most, and one I do so often, I sometimes find myself zoning out, surprised when I pulled up to my drive, marveling at my ability to navigate like a homing pigeon. The roads are generally quiet, especially outside of tourist season. so it's usually just me in the woods and whatever lives in them. I don't remember seeing any other thing, not even a bird or a fox, until I see him, the farmer. I described him as a farmer from the start. When you live in the country, you learn to spot them. There's something in their walk and weather-beaten face which shows they are in a constant battle with nature, and everyone knows she's a cruel mistress. Hard life farming, back-breaking work, which never appealed to me. I got an office job in the nearest town as soon as I could. A couple of the neighbors thought I was a snob for it, no doubt, but I'm not made for farming. The psychiatrist had asked me if I had ever felt like an outsider in my village. I never used to. The farmer was dressed in typical farmer clothing, but something about him felt strange from the get-go. It wasn't the gun, though the police sure did love that. What type of gun was it? Was it loaded? Did he point it at you? All these questions like I was some kind of gunslinger. I had no damn idea about most of it. A rifle, I think? God knows if it was loaded. How the hell would I know that? And no, he never even looked at me. Not even once. Not even when he walked directly in front of my car. He had stormed out from the woods behind the pub and into the road before I could blink, and without thinking, I'd swerved. I had never even hit a rabbit before, and I sure wasn't going to start with a farmer if I could help it. But I had never swerved like this either. I can remember how the thoughts slid through my brain as my hands worked, as if in slow motion on the wheel as the car veered across the road. Should I steer into it? No, that's ice. Tree or hedge? Tree. Would I stop in time? No. I hit the tree driver's side on. I don't remember much, just the pain taking root in the core of me and flowering out into my body. And the blood was everywhere, though I couldn't tell where it was coming from because it felt as though every inch of me hurt. I knew immediately, with dreadful certainty, that this was the type of pain that changes a person, if there was a person left behind after it at all. I must have blacked out then, because I don't remember calling for help, which wouldn't have come anyway. I was too far away from the pub for them to hear, and the nearest home was mine, useless and soulless, a mile or so further down the road. When I eventually woke, the women were there helping me. I distinctly remember how soothing it was to open my eyes and realize help had arrived. The pain was still there, of course, but suffering it so much easier in the company. One lady, the one I think of as the blonde lady, was cradling my head in her lap. I later found out in hospital she had practically held my skull together, like a cracked egg, leaking yolk onto her white skirt. They had somehow pulled my unconscious, broken body out of the wreckage. At the time, I don't think I even thought about that. I was glad I could see the sky, though. The sun was setting, and the sky was a beautiful symphony of pinks and reds. I remember thinking I could just fade away, bleeding out on the tarmac, in a twisted caricature of the blood-red sun in the sky, and be without pain, my broken tune adding to the harmony. But the women pulled me through. I'm not sure how long we waited there in the road before the ambulance arrived. The pub had called them. The police had been interested in that, wanting to know how they had known about my accident. I told them it must have been the second lady, the one I call the Whispering Lady. To be honest, though I don't remember much about her even now, I remember her comforting me for a while, singing songs in my ear, and whispering promises of how I would survive, about how I would get through this nightmare. I do remember how grateful I was to her, though. I held on to her voice when I thought I couldn't bear the weight of my pain, and she carried me through. I believed her. I trusted her. Maybe I shouldn't have. When the paramedics arrived, they peeled me off the road like a scab. The pain was white hot and all-encompassing. Both ladies tried to soothe it with their cold hands and low words. My last memory before blacking out again was of their faces, eyes desperate and mouths begging me to live. With hindsight, I should have listened. I should have bled out there in those woods, in that canopy of trees under my blood-red sun. Maybe that would have finished this whole thing. My body healed eventually, though. After months in the hospital, I was allowed home. I struggled to remember what had happened at first. When I began assembling my fragments of memories from before the crash, it felt like I was trying to reassemble a broken mirror. No matter how I placed the pieces, it never felt right. The vision was never clear. Maybe that's why I was so insistent on finding the women, to find out what had really happened, hoping they could hold up the mirror smiling and I would be whole again. See? No 7 years bad luck for you. I was wrong, of course. I placed an advert in the local paper to trace them and to thank them for saving my life. And within 2 days my life was changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. This is important. You have to know what happened to believe me. And you have to believe me for both our sakes. The police had tried to trace the women, of course, and the farmer, but there were no leads. The paramedics confirmed what little description I was able to give of the women and informed the police that the women had saved my life by being there that evening. I believed that too. The police eventually wrote it all off as an accident. They were dangerous roads. A near-fatal car crash wasn't unusual. But like me, they believed that something about this didn't feel right. I could tell that they thought it was me. Maybe I'd been drunk or suicidal, but I wasn't, and I'm not. Well, not then, at least. It was the psychiatrist who had suggested tracing the women for my own peace of mind. She had thought they might be more willing to get in touch directly with me rather than the police. She sure was right about that. I placed an advert with a simple thank you message and a number to get in touch. Most of me was hopeful that I would hear from them and that it'd turn out that they were distant relatives of a family down the road. I'd take them for a meal in my local and we'd laugh about this. But I think a part of me always knew that the truth was nestled deep down inside my scar tissue, and I was picking at it with dirty fingers, insistent on opening the fresh wounds. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days after my advert was published, I had a call, though it wasn't from the women. A man called in the middle of the night and left a voicemail. He didn't leave a name or a contact number, but I knew who he was. He told me that he was sorry and that I would hear from the women soon. They had saved my life, but that I had made certain deals which I needed to make good. He knew this because he had made those same deals on the same day at the same place 33 years before with the same women. Like I said, he never said he was the farmer, but I knew it. I listened to that short message over and over again. I could hear the sorrow and emptiness in his voice. I imagine mine will be like that soon. The ladies arrived that night. They didn't knock. They were just there in my front room, standing by my coffee table when I walked in from the kitchen. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. Since the voicemail, I'd been expecting them. Maybe I'd been expecting them ever since the crash. The women looked as I remembered. They weren't threatening, but I was very aware of their presence, as if I was standing in the room with 2 lions or other deadly predators. I suppose I was. Neither of them spoke until the whispering lady held up a small bag, which was filled with a writhing, opaque, yellowish blob about the size of a kitten. I yearned for it with all of my being. "Your soul," was all she whispered, and I knew it to be true. I had given them my soul when I was bleeding there on the tarmac. It had seemed so small and unimportant at the time, and I thought they would protect it. My eyes welled with tears, and I held out my hands, imploring them to return it. They stared at me with impassive eyes, studying me like a fisherman would a fish before pulling the hook from its mouth. You promised us 33 years worth of souls. Give us this, and yours will be returned. Her whisper was soft, but her words hit me hard. I knew I'd have to make good. I can't live without the final shard of my mirror. I nodded, and they vanished, taking my precious soul with them. They'll be back soon. I know this. I belong to them now, and soon they'll take all of me. I am their new farmer, their reaper of souls. So if you see me walking out of the woods one day, know I'm sorry, and don't make promises you'll live to regret. Or even better, don't swerve.
When Alex went missing, our thoughts immediately went to the last person she had been seen with, a man named Craig, from whom she had received a ride home from work. They were co-workers, Greg being newly employed in the freezer section at the store. They lived in the same apartment complex, something they learned only when Alex was asking around for a ride, her car being in the shop at the time. Craig offered, allegedly wanting to befriend someone at the job. As they talked, it was revealed that they lived just a flight of stairs away from each other. This, Alex must have thought, was quite a lucky coincidence. Alex was my girlfriend. When she failed to return any of my texts later that night, and when I heard of how she had arrived home, I admit that I assumed something had happened, something which I believed was unforgivable. She had always been faithful, always the best girlfriend you could reasonably ask for, and yet I assumed she had suddenly developed a romantic or sexual appetite beyond what I could provide, or had simply become tired of me. They were foolish thoughts, I know, considering what actually happened. The next day, I went to her apartment, but she wasn't there. Not knowing which apartment room belonged to Craig, I went to their workplace, where I found him performing his duties, as normally as you could imagine. Publicly confronting him, I asked what he and Alex had done last night, and where she was now. Catherine, another coworker of Alex, who had informed me of Alex's activity, tried to step in, but I am naturally short-tempered, and was at that moment irreconcilably hot-headed. I believed Alex had cheated on me, and that Craig had driven her to it. I told Catherine to stay out of the way. Craig turned to her and said it was all right, which just made me angrier. But despite my anger, Craig had a disarming way about him, and I found myself listening to his words rather than punching his teeth in. He explained that he did in fact give Alex a ride home, and that they had parted respectfully, with the only contact between them being their arms occasionally nudging against each other during the drive. He added that she had gone up to her apartment, and he hadn't seen or heard from her since. The next morning, he thought to wait for her, see if she needed a ride to work, but that she still hadn't emerged by the time he needed to leave without being late. Even though I had no proof that his story was true, it was at least plausible, although I couldn't think of a reason for Alex to not only ignore or miss my calls, but to not come to her front door either. Before the shame of my dramatic outrage could cause my face to redden, I left the floor and went to the front, where I asked to talk to the manager. He recognized me from when I would occasionally give Alex rides to work, and asked if I had seen her before I could ask him the very same. The question now, in the open, I became even more worried. I called her again. He did as well, but neither of us got an answer. Alex has only one parent, a mother with whom she hasn't had the greatest relationship. They hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, so I didn't bother contacting her. With nothing else to do, I went back to Alex's apartment, hoping that she had just fallen into a deep sleep. I knocked for nearly a minute straight, but no one came to answer. Panicking, I pulled out my phone and called the police, then ran to the apartment's office, where I asked the landlord if she could unlock Alex's door. I explained the situation to her, and thankfully, she was kind enough
and familiar enough with me to appease my request. She opened and entered, calling out Alex's name before allowing me to follow. She received no response and stepped aside so that I could head in. The apartment was just as I remembered it. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing out of order, nothing broken or missing or oddly arranged. I went into Alex's bedroom, and to my surprise, I found her cell phone lying on her pillow. It still held half a charge. Alex always kept her phone locked, but after a few tries at the passcode, I managed to unlock it. The code turned out to be my birthday. It made me feel even more shameful about my assumptions regarding her activity the night before. I respected her privacy and only accessed her calls and texts, glancing the recipients and times of the latter, not the content. The most recent calls were from me and her boss, texts as well, nothing which would have given any clues as to her whereabouts. No late-night invites to a party or a friend's house. Her social media profiles were similarly unhelpful. The police arrived shortly after, and I told them all that I knew regarding her disappearance. They got in touch with her job, spoke to her boss and Craig. The latter was given permission to leave work and come down to the apartment complex. The police even went so far as to access the security camera feed of the previous night, which the landlord offered without objection. And just as Craig had said, Alex was clearly seen leaving his car unharmed. They went their separate ways, him inside his apartment, Alex up the stairs and into hers. Nothing happened in the time that elapsed between their arrival and Craig's departure to work the next day. He was even seen waiting for her for several minutes before leaving work, just as he had mentioned doing when I first questioned him at the store. His story was straight, confirmed at last. Alex had gone missing, and yet she hadn't left her apartment. But how? The police took their statements, offered their half-hearted condolences, and made doubtful assurances about her discovery. They floated around the idea that perhaps she had gone out on her own for whatever reason, even though the security footage said otherwise. It's only been a short while. Give her time. It was obvious that they weren't really taking things seriously. As expected, my alibi was also questioned, though I had no trouble accounting for my whereabouts during the time frame of her disappearance. I had been at work, late night to the early morning shift, and because of this, I was rather tired, following my own inquiries and the police's questioning. My exhaustion must have been obvious on my face, because Craig offered his couch for me to rest on. I was still at the apartment when the police had left. They hadn't even bothered to formally pose their questions at the station, merely asked them there at the apartment's office. I was initially put off by Craig's offer, my unfounded anger at him still lingering from earlier in the morning, despite the elimination of him as a suspect. But I was tired and didn't want to drive the distance to my own home when I could barely keep my eyes open. And as before, there was something potently calming about his demeanor. I felt a certain kinship with him being the last known person to have come into contact with Alex. So I begrudgingly accepted his offer, asserting that I'd only need maybe 20 minutes of rest before heading out. I followed him to his apartment, and we entered together. His apartment wasn't unusual in any way, and was largely undecorated, with him having just recently moved in. Some basic shelves held a few books, an undeniably old, yet surprisingly comfy, couch sat against one wall, a TV on one of those steel and glass stands against the opposite wall. I didn't venture beyond the living room. I had no need to. He showed me where the bathroom was, offered me a glass of water, and left me. My tiredness was greater than I thought. Within seconds, I was drifting off, while Craig did whatever he needed to do in his room down the hall. Even though I had said that 20 minutes would have been enough to refresh me, actually being awakened about that much time later only made me feel worse. The cause of my awakening, a phone notification, had abruptly stirred me from my sleep. I reached in my pocket and withdrew my phone to check the notification, but found nothing. I hadn't received one. Another notification sounded off, this one coming from something in another pocket. I searched for it and found Alex's phone. I hadn't thought to offer it to the police as evidence, and being the dutiful detectives that they are, they hadn't thought to ask for it. I checked the notification. It was a promotional email from one of the restaurants that she liked to visit, nothing pertaining to her disappearance. I would have put the phone away then and returned to sleep. My brain and body urged me to, but I noticed something which blasted away all thoughts of sleep from my mind. Alex's phone was connected to a Wi-Fi network. I knew for a fact that the apartment complex didn't have a complex-wide open Wi-Fi network, and there weren't any businesses nearby which offered one either. I unlocked the phone and accessed the Wi-Fi settings. Sure enough, she was connected to the network on a Netgear router, and as my mind tried to understand this, my attention was drawn to something in my peripheral vision. On the floor next to the TV was a router, a Netgear router. I knew it was the one to which Alex's phone had automatically connected. Alex had been in the apartment before, long enough to receive the password for the Wi-Fi. Two feelings overcame me then. The first, rage. Unfocused, untargeted, simply felt as a mounting tempest of emotion. Alex had been inside Craig's apartment. She had somehow eluded the detection of the cameras, even though there wasn't any feasible way for her to have done so. My old thoughts returned then, the thoughts which made Alex out to be a traitor, a liar. These thoughts brought me from the couch, led me storming down the hall towards Craig's room. But then, the second feeling took over. Fear. Because what I hadn't initially noticed, what was only apparent once I had entered the windowless hall, was that it was oddly cold in the apartment. In the living room, the couch sat just beneath the window, and sunlight had poured in to bathe the room in warmth. But farther away, there in the hall, it was absolutely freezing, well below any air conditioning's achievable lowest temperature. Something was artificially producing an atmosphere of extreme cold. Anger had driven me many steps, but fear had stopped me dead in my tracks. I wanted to turn back. Every alarm and instinctual signal in my brain screamed at me to leave, to forget about Alex and simply survive. But my conscience, that thing we think makes us better than the rest of the animals, impelled me to push on, to enter Craig's bedroom, where I knew I would either find Alex or some major clue as to her location. So, on through the chill, I went. A veritable mist had arisen outside Craig's room. A threshold of frost rimmed the door. I grasped the knob and recoiled away. It was uncomfortably cold. Extending the sleeve of my shirt over my hand as a makeshift glove, I gripped the knob and pushed open the door. Seated in the center of the room, in a steel chair with some sort of industrial coolant pump above her, was Alex. Her skin was pale, almost blue. Her hair was a jagged mass of stalactites, her eyes and mouth frozen shut. She was plainly dead. Isn't she beautiful? Craig was sitting on a bed behind Alex. I hadn't even noticed him. The mist was much thicker in the room, the atmosphere much colder. I started shivering, and it was the absence of this reaction and Alex's body which confirmed to me that she was dead. Had been for a while. Craig rose from the bed calmly. He was plainly accustomed to the frigid temperatures, his body oddly resilient to them. He seemed to even enjoy the cold, which was insufferable to me, judging by the way he deeply inhaled before speaking. She's just been preserved at the height of her beauty. Not another day of age will assail her. I have captured her at her most pristine, and will keep her in this way forever. You may join her if you'd like to. Just then I noticed his hand subtly move. and saw a remote of some kind produced from his pocket. Before I could act or even see the exact nature of the device, he pressed a button and the room quickly grew colder. I felt my limbs stiffen, my skin tighten. The natural warmth of my body was quickly being snuffed out by some Hyperborean blast. Thankfully, I hadn't been far from the door. Using what remained of my quickly dwindling strength, I turned and fled from the room. The cold air seemed to follow me, to almost envelop me as I raced down the hall, into the living room, and out into the open air where the sun still held dominance. I had escaped that frozen, unsunned nightmare, but Alex hadn't. I quickly ran to my car and dialed the police as I pulled away. It still felt as if icicles floated around in my veins as I drove, and even my thoughts seemed to have been slowed by the cold. But I wasn't going to stop until I was far away from that apartment. Officers were sent to investigate my claims, although from the way they responded to my half-crazed explanation, it was obvious that they doubted my story. A few minutes later, I received a call, expecting them to ask me to come to identify the body or something. But instead, they said that not only was Craig not at the apartment, but that it was empty as well. They found nothing which resembled a large refrigeration unit. They found nobody. They asked, quite seriously, for me to come back to the apartment complex. And before I hastily ended the call, I heard the officer whisper to another, "Send a car by his house, too." Apparently, they felt that my lie was evidence of some guilt in the matter. I didn't go home. Instead, drove to a motel, where I have been staying for the last few hours. I don't know how Craig managed to eliminate the freezing cold in his apartment and transport Alex elsewhere in such a short time, but I will find out. I will find him. My family came from a small village in the old country, the kind where traditions that we call cute or folksy today were followed to the letter. Even though my parents immigrated to the country where I now live years before I was born, my childhood is filled with memories of my parents telling me what to do or not do for some strange, arcane reason. Not that I'm complaining, of course. Some of these traditions were fun, especially as a kid. I never had to make my bed before school because doing that gives you bad luck, and I would never know when I'd have a pop quiz. On nights before I had a big test at school, Mom and Dad would make me a big bowl of porridge and jam, and I would stick my face in it for good luck as they would laugh and hug me, even though I'd make a mess of their clothes. Of course, other superstitions were less fun or more confusing. "Don't whistle inside the house, you'll lose all your money," Mom would say. "Don't put keys on the glass table," Dad would say. "Go put bread in the neighbor's yard so that the birds will circle their house instead of ours," Dad would also say. "They're not our people, it won't affect them," he would say with a smile and a wink. The one tradition that they held far above all the others, though, was to never violate guests' rights. Anytime anyone would show up at our front doorstep, neighbors, Girl Scouts, missionaries, whoever you can imagine, they would be invited inside and immediately presented with a plate of bread and salt, water, and polite conversation, as well as anything else they might ask for. It often made for interesting, if not awkward, situations in our family home. Eventually, I grew up and left my parents' home for college, and every time I would come home for a visit, I would be greeted with a plate of homemade bread and salt and warm hugs from my parents, asking me to tell them crazy stories from college. When I eventually got engaged, I brought my future wife, Lindsay, to my parents' home to find them waiting for us at the front door, my mom holding that same ornate plate covered with bread and salt, and both of them telling my fiancé in their broken English how happy they were for the both of us. Years after I had gotten married, my wife had told me the great news that we were going to have our first child. Towards the end of her pregnancy, my parents came to visit so they could be there when their first grandchild would be born. And this time, it was my turn to greet them with bread and salt. The bread was store-bought, and the salt was that cheap discount kind that you get at the bottom of the shelf of the grocery store. They smiled, dipped the bread into the salt, and ate it happily, before hugging and kissing me. Even after all these years, I was still their little boy. My daughter, Lily, was born a healthy girl. I was always convinced she was special. She started to smile far before any baby would, and always seemed to be so alert. I was convinced that she would grow up to be some kind of genius. After a couple of months of raising our child in an apartment, we decided it was about time to find a real house for her to grow up in. We went out into the country, and after searching around, we found the perfect house for us to raise Lily in. After negotiating and closing, we found ourselves moving everything that we owned into our new house. From first glance, everything seemed ordinary. The houses were nice and spacious, and each property had a couple of acres to it. The neighbors were close by, but not so close that you felt smothered or that you were being constantly watched by someone in the neighborhood. It was all to change when we had our first visit from a neighbor. Lindsay was cradling a crying Lily, trying to get her to sleep, when the doorbell rang. Not wanting to risk the doorbell being rung again, and possibly irritating Lily further, I went to answer it to see a man wearing country clothes and a cowboy hat, accompanied by a woman who I assumed was his wife, holding a dish of some kind. I opened the door and stepped out. "Howdy there," the man said, extending his arm for a handshake, which I accepted. "My name's Victor, and this is my wife Marlene," he said, introducing himself. Hi," I said, obviously tired from the move and from taking constant care of Lily. "I'm Sasha. Sorry, my wife Lindsay is inside with our baby." Don't worry about it. The missus and I know how it is. We have 3 of our own," Victor said in his loud, booming voice, throwing his arm around his wife, who was smiling uncomfortably. "Now, I won't waste any more of your time. We just came by to drop off this casserole to welcome you into the neighborhood," Victor continued as Marlene extended her hands to pass me the casserole dish. It did smell great. At that point, my upbringing kicked in. "Would you like to come inside?" I asked. Lindsay would kill me for letting anyone in while we were still unpacking, but I just couldn't bring myself to break this superstition I was raised with. After escorting Victor and Marlene to my kitchen, I put out a plate of bread and salt. I got confused looks from them, but they subsided after I also put out some water, whiskey, and the casserole that Marlene had made. We made small talk for a bit, and at some point, Lindsay did come down with Lily to meet them. After another half hour of some awkward getting to know each other, Victor and Marlene got up to leave, saying something about getting some housework done before the week started. As Marlene left, Victor told her to go ahead so that he could tell me about something that he had forgotten to bring up. Marlene became visibly uncomfortable and left without another word. Victor turned to me, and the large smile he had on all afternoon had left. "Now, there's something you should know about this neighborhood," he began. "It's very safe and has the nicest folks you'll ever meet. But every now and again," he trailed off, not knowing exactly how to continue with what he wanted to say. Every now and again, something comes by. We're not exactly sure what it is," he continued on. I didn't understand what he was saying. "What do you mean, something?" I asked. "Well, that's just it. We're not sure what it is. It ain't human, I can tell you that much," Victor explained. "Is it some kind of animal?" "No, it's hard to explain, really. It ain't anything natural, I can tell you that much. Now, the important thing to remember is that it'll never hurt you or anything. It only comes around once in a blue moon, and it'll just kind of knock at your door. When it happens, I usually just pull the blinds down and turn the TV volume up. It goes away eventually." At that point, I had no clue what to say. I just stared at Victor as if he would burst out laughing, saying that it was all just a joke that they liked to play on the new neighbors. He didn't, though. As we stood there in silence, he gave me a pat on the back and walked out the front door. We never brought it up again, Life moved on, and we got settled in our new home, and we even became good friends with Victor and Marlene over the next few months after our initial encounter. Lily kept growing, and I could have sworn that she looked more and more like her mother every day. As we neared her first birthday, Lily started to become fussier and fussier. At first, we chalked it up to things such as teething or nightmares, but it only became worse and worse. Then, on the night of her first birthday, we awoke to shrieks coming from her bedroom. We raced to her crib and found her crying, and with nothing we tried soothing her. It became very obvious to us she was in pain. We raced to the emergency room, where they took us in and ran all sorts of tests on our girl. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, a stern-faced doctor walked into the room. He asked us to sit down. I can't remember the start of the conversation. All I can remember is the word that caused the world around us to crash. Cancer. He went on to explain how the x-rays had shown a rather large, highly inoperable tumor on Lily's brain. He went over our options, explained to us that it was within our rights to try chemotherapy, but given the size of the tumor, as well as Lily's young age, how it was almost certain to not have an effect. After the doctor left, we sat in that hospital room in silence for what appeared to be hours, then silently packed up our things, took Lily, and drove back home in complete silence. As soon as we entered the house, Lily left for our bedroom and shut herself in there, while I set Lily down in her baby chair in the living room, after which I sat down in the kitchen and fought back tears. I sat there all day, barely moving for hours, getting up only to use the bathroom and to soothe or feed Lily when needed. This painful routine continued for days, with hardly a word being spoken in the house. I was beginning to wonder if mine and Lindsay's relationship would be able to survive. I called my parents in tears, and they promised that within a few days they would be there to help us out. On the 7th day after Lily's diagnosis, Lindsay was in the bedroom as per usual, while I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing, while Lily was sitting in her baby chair in the living room. I hardly even noticed that the sun was setting until the bottom floor of the house was pitch dark. As soon as I flicked the light switch on, I heard a knock every day at the door. I was in no mood to entertain visitors, so I just sat back down at the kitchen table. The knocking wouldn't stop. 1 minute, 2 minutes. After 3 minutes, I had lost my patience completely, and I got up to tell whoever it was to buzz off. It had been a while since I had actually spoken, so as I walked up to the door, I carefully rehearsed in my head exactly what I would say. Once I had turned the knob and opened the door, I stopped dead in my tracks, with my mouth agape. What stood there was definitely not human, or at least, not anymore. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head. It also had a mouth, but no eyes or nose. It wasn't wearing any clothes, and all its flesh was a blackened color and appeared to have a slimy texture. Whatever it was, it gave off a foul stench, so much so that it took every ounce of strength I had to not vomit right there. I stood there in front of this creature for I'm not entirely sure how long. Once I had come to terms with the fact that this wasn't a nightmare or hallucination, I tried to figure out what to do. Should I go get the neighbors and ask them to bring their gun? I thought. Should I run inside, lock the doors, and hide? I continued to stand there and think, half expecting what it was to at some point just lunge at me and kill me on the spot. To this day, I am not entirely sure what caused me to do what I did. I must have been insane. I must have thought that my daughter is going to die anyway, and that I might as well go too. Instead, I just stepped back past the doorway into my house, never taking my eyes off the creature. Once I was in the house, I stepped to the side and gestured with my hand. Come in. The creature took a few steps, slowly at first, but then picked up the pace, to the point where it walked at the speed of a normal person and then made it past the doorway and into my house. I'm insane. I'm insane. I'm insane. I kept thinking to myself as I walked into the kitchen, feeling the creature's presence behind me. I turned around, and there, it was standing in my kitchen, having followed me in. Hands trembling, I reached into the cupboard and took out the old plate that my mother had gifted us when we had gotten married. From the pantry next to the cupboard, I took out a few slices of black bread and poured a generous amount of salt onto the unoccupied portion of the plate. With my hands still shaking and salt spilling from the side, I set the plate down on the table in front of where it was standing. It didn't take any of the bread or salt, and I wasn't even sure whether it could eat, to be honest. At that moment, Lily started crying. With everything that had been happening, I completely forgot that she was still in her baby chair in the living room. I saw the creature move its head in the direction of the living room. At that moment, I had started to regret what I had done. Even if my daughter was terminally ill, I didn't want her to die like this. For what seemed like an endless amount of time, the creature had its head turned towards the living room, listening to Lily's cries. I was ready to attack at any second if I saw it move an inch in her direction. Instead, it slowly turned its head towards the plate of bread and salt, took a slice of bread, and ate it in one bite, baring its rotten yellow teeth. Once it had finished, it turned its head in my direction, gave me a nod, and headed in the direction of the door. The moment it stepped past the doorway, Lily's cries stopped, and I watched it disappear into the darkness. I stood there stunned, not knowing exactly what had just happened. After coming to my senses, I ran to close and lock the door, and ran to grab Lily. When I had picked her up, I had noticed that she was smiling. It was the first time she had smiled in weeks at that point. I cradled her the entire night, expecting her to start crying from pain again at some point, but she didn't. As the days went by, Lily seemed to always be in a pleasant mood. Soon, it came time to take Lily into the doctor to examine our options once again, with Lindsay joining us. I decided not to tell Lindsay what had happened that night, figuring she was burdened with enough as it was. For the first time since we had gotten that terrible news, we appeared to be a family again. We sat in the waiting room, expecting to hear bleak news once again. When the same doctor emerged from before, he didn't have the stern face he had the past week. Instead, his face was visibly confused. Complete remission. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The doctor explained how they had run each test 3 times to be completely sure, because they had no clue how it was possible. A tumor that big to just disappear within a week was supposed to be impossible. We returned home that day with our happy, healthy girl with a new outlook on life. Lily is now almost a teenager, and I'm grateful for every day I have with her. I won't pretend to say I have all the answers to life. I don't know if there's a God. I don't know if there's an afterlife. But I can tell you this: never turn away a guest. Spending a week at the bottom of the ocean is pretty much as crazy as it sounds. You get into a tin can with a couple other people, and they lower you into the ocean. You sink to the sea floor and live in the airspace at the top of the can for a week. There's not a lot of space when you're breathing fresh air down there, so the only reason to go is if you live to scuba. That's all there is to do down there. Normally you get an hour of dive time for each tank of oxygen you're carrying. So every hour, you have to go back up to the surface from the bottom of the ocean, which takes time. When you're living down there, it's different. Your dive time becomes limited only by your endurance. We set up fast refill stations and use high-powered hoses to refill our tanks with oxygen. That way you can stay in the water as long as you want. Hours fly by while you're down there, and you can never get bored. It's a whole different planet on the sea floor, and who wouldn't want to spend all day staring at aliens? Fish of countless varieties swim past, in all the colors of the rainbow. Sea turtles and octopus, dolphins and manta rays, sharks and whales. You'll see it all. Not to mention the unparalleled beauty of the coral reefs themselves and all the plethora of life forms that dwell symbiotically within it. The only thing I didn't like was nighttime at the bottom of the ocean. You would look out from the habitat into utter blackness, darker than anything you've ever seen. And how can you not imagine what's out there? We had seen sharks, giant octopus, and barracudas swimming nearby. There's also everything else your imagination can come up with. Everything you've seen on movies and TV that isn't even real. Amphibious humanoids who look like Swamp Thing, who creep up silently from the kelp and grab your arm with their hands, dotted with suckers, like the tentacles of an octopus. Giant kraken and massive dinosaur sharks left over from the Jurassic period, and all other manners of nightmares could be out in that darkness. If you spent a week down there, you would begin to realize too, just how ignorant we are of the world that exists in tandem with ours. You try to avoid these thoughts when you're out at the habitats at night. You have to leave the habitat to go to the bathroom, so there's no avoiding it if you need to go number 2. One night I was awoken by a rumbling in my stomach around 3 a.m. It was dark inside the tin can we called home, silent except for the sound of water splashing up against the inside of the hab. My stomach lurched again, this time more urgently. I realized I would need to go outside. I put my mask on, but didn't take my regulator or oxygen since the little hut we used as a toilet wasn't far away, maybe 20 feet. I could easily hold my breath for that long. The light from the hut gleamed ahead of me as I dove down into the darkness. My mind was still foggy with sleep. The dim bulb of the outhouse was the only other light in this universe, so I went to it with urgency, for more than one reason. When I got there, I popped up into the little air bubble inside and pulled down my trunks. I had made it just in time. Pretty soon fish were coming by for their morning meal, and I swatted at them with my hand, trying to pinch it off before they could burrow their little faces further into my ass crack. Fish just love to eat anything. As if that wasn't nightmare enough, there was that blackness all around except for the light of the outhouse and the one from the habitat. The darkness stretched out forever and was infinite in its mystery. I wondered how far away the nearest great white shark was, and if they would be attracted to the scent of all the smaller fish. I shook my head and tried to think of anything else. It was completely silent except for my breathing, and the sound of water splashing gently against the inside of the hut. I finally pulled up my trunks, slapping a fish with my hand as I did so, and waited for a minute for the air to clear, so to speak. No sense rushing the dive back into the blackness, I thought, especially considering what I had just polluted it with. After a minute, I took a breath and popped back into the water from the air bubble. I swam towards the light of the habitat. When I was not even halfway there, both lights flickered and went out. I was immediately disoriented. My foggy mind had just been asleep a few minutes ago, and I wished I had taken longer to wake up before venturing out alone. I hadn't even woken anyone else up to tell them I was going. The after image of the glow from the habitat still danced in my vision, so I followed it, my heart beating fast and heavy in my chest. I felt terrified and hoped I was heading in the right direction. I followed my instincts and training and tried to ignore the part of my brain that told me I might not be going the right way. I felt something large brush against my hand and recoiled in shock. What the hell was that? I wondered. I was suddenly picturing a giant hammerhead right in front of me, instead of the habitat. My panic intensified. My vision was starting to go a bit red around the edges, and I wondered how much time I had wasted. It was a good thing I could hold my breath for a long time. I tried to swim in the direction of the habitat, but I suddenly wasn't sure which way it was anymore. The thing that had brushed against my hand had felt large, and it had scared me more than a bit. Kicking with my flippers, I began swimming in a direction I thought was right. My hand brushed up against it again, whatever it was. This time, it was on the other side of me. I tried to ignore my fear and kept kicking my legs. My vision was beginning to flood with redness, and I was really starting to feel true dread and fear bloom inside me as I had never felt before. Every part of me was screaming for air. I tried to calm my mind and remember my training. My hand grabbed onto something, and in my confused and oxygen-deprived state, I mistook it for a power line running to the outhouse. I began to pull myself along the misshapen tube. It seemed to squirm and writhe in my grip, but I continued along nonetheless, hoping it would lead me back to the habitat. As I got closer, I felt more of the weird organically shaped tubes. They felt lumpy and had spikes and divots here and there. I realized with disgust that they were definitely not oxygen or electrical lines. They seemed to stick to my hands when I grabbed onto them, not wanting to let go. I had to pry my hand off the last time and decided to stop touching them altogether. Just as I was about to lose all hope, my left hand brushed up against the hard metallic edge of the habitat. I realized with a wave of horrified relief, I had almost swam right past it and out into the open water. I felt the shape of it and managed to correct my path. I popped my head up into the habitat and gasped for air, panting and coughing up water from my lungs. I climbed out of the water and managed to find the ladder leading up to my bunk. "I almost died out there just now," I yelled, and was surprised when no one woke up to ask if I was okay. I felt new fear well up inside me, thinking of all the tangled organisms that had been all over the outside of the habitat. What the hell were those things? And why wasn't anyone talking or waking up inside the hab? I rummaged through my things and pulled out my flashlight, wishing I had brought it with me earlier. How stupid. If I had died, I would have deserved it. I turned the light on and screamed. There was no rational explanation for what I saw inside the habitat. The other two members of my crew were surrounded by what appeared to be misshapen tentacles. But no, that's not quite right. Not tentacles. These were different. The long tubular shapes that came up out of the water reminded me of the recent article about a siphonophore that had been discovered off the coast of Australia. It was now recorded as the longest creature ever seen by man. It was really a collection of zoids that came together and cloned itself thousands upon thousands of times to create an infinitely long, silly string that could stretch for hundreds of meters. The crew had called it akin to an underwater galaxy, and pictures of the siphonophore looked otherworldly. It went on forever, a twisting, spiraling organism that faded off into the distant ocean with no end in sight. This was like that, only much worse. This siphonophore appeared to have mutated, and it had picked up some new abilities never seen before in all my research. The thing had absorbed other marine life somehow. I saw barracuda with sharp teeth, small sharks, and eels, their eyes wide and terrified, opening and closing their mouths. They were covered with a thin membrane and appeared to have been attached to the thing against their will. They were now prisoners of it, being dragged along by the massive, ropey sea creature. My crew had the tentacle things all around them, choking them at their necks and wrapped around their bodies and arms. The white flesh of the thing was spreading across them quickly, wrapping them up in its slimy sheath. My crewmate, Mike, tried to scream, but his voice was muffled as I saw a vine of siphonophore crawl down his throat, planting little roots as it went. I was terrified, hyperventilating. I ducked back into the furthest corner of my bunk and watched in horror as the thing consumed my crewmates rapidly and attached itself to them, I watched as it pulled them under and dragged them down into the ocean, their eyes still wide and afraid. Would it filter the ocean water through its gills so they could live down there? I wondered. Would it provide oxygen to the new members of the colony, or would it just consume them for fuel and move on? No one would have believed me if I told them what happened, so I said it was a diving accident. I told them I tried to save Mike and Beth, and there wasn't anything I could do. A search party had turned up nothing, as I had expected. When I got back to the surface, I told my family I would never step foot in the sea again. They think it's because I'm remorseful. They think I just feel bad about Mike and Beth. But that's not it. I feel bad about them, sure, but what I really think about is what's down there, under the surface. I saw how fast that thing consumed them. I think about the transatlantic garbage patch and how that was the big problem for a while. I think we may have a new problem now. Eat it. Charlotte pushed Marlena's face closer to the fly-infested dog turd. Eat it and be grateful. My daddy saw your daddy at the soup kitchen, so you must be hungry. A cacophony of giggles erupted behind Charlotte. A gaggle of pigtailed, ponytailed, and bob-cutted brats from hell. "You're hurting me," Marlena cried. "Please just let me go." Strands of her flowing brown hair were beginning to touch the droppings. "Enough, Charlotte," I shouted. "Leave her alone, or I'll tell the teacher." Charlotte turned her head towards me in a slow, calculated manner. "Oh, look who it is, Pee-Pee Boy Carlos," she pointed, her gang bellowing out on cue. "Did you run out of pants to pee in yet?" "That was 3 years ago. We were in 2nd grade. "You want to know what my daddy said about you?" She took a step towards me, blonde pigtails bouncing as she moved. "He said your mommy didn't just skip town. He said your daddy killed her." "Stop it, that's not true." I took a step backward. "He said your daddy got mad because your mommy was sleeping with every man in town. He said that your daddy doesn't even know if you're his kid." Her next step sent me stumbling backward, tripping over Marlena. My skull smacked against the asphalt. The group roared with laughter, joined by a new voice, Marlena's. "Ew," Charlotte giggled. "I knew you were full of piss. I guess you're full of crap now, too." The crowd went wild. The sudden blare of the school bell caused the herd to break apart and head towards the building, leaving me to tend to my wounds. My ears were still ringing from the knock to my head when I first heard her. "Bring her to me." The woman's voice turned my blood into ice. It was a low, guttural whisper, echoing from the tunnel at the far end of the playground, 50 yards away. I pushed myself up and turned towards my caller. She was wiry, so thin that it looked as if a weak gust of wind would snap her in half. Her skin was gray and sagged, as if it was about to fall off. With her right hand, she beckoned towards me once more. Her voice sounded like it was emanating from all around me. "Bring her to me." I wanted to run, but my legs betrayed me. My feet were glued to the ground. Tears began to flow down my face. Just as she was about to speak again, my bladder released. "Carlos!" I turned, snapped out of the trance by my teacher's sharp voice. "Recess is over. Get over here now." "My goodness, did you wet yourself again? I'm going to have to call your father." The class clapped and laughed from the window as if I had given them some sort of encore. "We can't keep doing this." My father kept his eye on the road as he spoke. "Dad, it was an accident. I saw some..." "I know it was an accident, boy, but you can't keep having them. You'll be starting middle school next year." "I know, Dad, I didn't mean to. I saw some..." "No one ever means to mess their pants. You just need to go to the bathroom more often. Sometimes you have to go, even if it doesn't feel like it. Do you understand?" "Dad, I'm trying to tell you that I..." "Understand?" "Yes, I understand." It was still early in the afternoon when we got home. My dad had to go back to work, so I was left alone. I took a quick shower, hopped on my bicycle, and rode back towards the tunnel. I wasn't sure who the woman was, but something inside me was burning to go back and see her. I parked my bike on the side of the tunnel opposite the school. It was a large, empty field with a few trees. No one was around, except for a couple of teenagers throwing water balloons at cars. Hello? I used my hands as a makeshift megaphone from 10 yards away. Is anyone there? The dark skeletal figure began crawling down the tunnel, bouncing side to side. The woman's bony gray elbows jutted out towards the walls. Her knees were locked straight, forcing her into a misshapen, triangle-like figure. She was giggling and humming as she wriggled forward. A sudden wave of chills poured over me, covering my body in goose flesh. I moved backward, away from the tunnel. The woman seemed incensed by this, and began moving faster. She started making a noise that sounded like she was rapidly licking and smacking her cracked, rotting lips. I turned to run, but was immediately pushed to the floor. "What are you looking for, your mommy?" It was one of the teenagers, wearing a red shirt. "You gotta get out of here." I pushed myself up in desperation. "Before you get hurt." "Is that a threat, twerp?" He shoved me down again, even harder. "My sister has class with this kid. She says he pees his pants all the time." His sidekick snickered at the same time she spoke. "Bring them to me." It sounded like she was inhaling as she called. "Please," I yelled. "Can't you hear her? We have to go." "The only thing I hear is a little boy about to pee his pants." I stood up once more and was immediately dropped by a punch to the gut. I laid on the ground, helpless as a red shirt jumped on my bicycle and rode off. The sidekick launched a water balloon at me before running away, hitting me square in the crotch. When I looked towards the tunnel, the woman was gone. Somewhere in the depths, I heard a faint, gurgling growl. I jumped up and raced towards home. The trip would take even longer without my bike. My dad's car was standing guard in the driveway when I arrived. He pushed the door open before I even reached the steps. "Where the hell were you, Carlos?" he yelled. "You think today was some kind of reward? That you could just run around town doing whatever you want?" "Dad, I'm sorry, please. I need to tell you, I saw..." "My God, did you piss in your pants again? Twice in one day?" "Dad, no. Someone threw a water balloon and I..." "A water balloon? You thought you had permission to go have a water balloon fight? In the middle of a school day? Get to your room now." "Dad, there was a..." "Now!" I moped into my room and crawled under the blankets. I tossed and turned that night. Every creak in the floorboards and whistle of the wind caused my heart to race. At some point, the sweet release of sleep rescued me. I could hear the other kids whispering and giggling behind my back at school the next day. I flinched every time I rounded a corner. Hearing the final bell ring felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. I stepped out of school, planning to take a long way home, when Marlena approached me. "Hey, Carlos," she said. "I'm sorry I laughed at you the other day. I was just trying to fit in." She started walking towards the playground. "Oh, it's okay, I guess." I began to follow without realizing it. "You know, Charlotte's not all that bad when you get to know her. She was just having fun." She started walking quicker. She kind of is. She's been bullying me since the 2nd grade." I matched her pace. "Well, either way." She came to an abrupt stop and turned to face me. "I wanted to thank you for sticking up for me." She slowly began leaning her face towards mine. My heart started banging in my chest. She inched closer, eyes closed. I gradually leaned back, closed my eyes. Our lips were nearly touching, and then... "Ew!" Charlotte's voice shot through the air like a bullet. "I told you he'd come if you told him to. Pee-pee boy has a crush on you." She laughed. Marlena stepped away, covered her mouth, and giggled. I opened my eyes and realized we were mere feet from the tunnel. "You really thought she was going to kiss you, didn't you?" Charlotte laughed. "I found another dog turd. This one is just for you." Marlena and another girl grabbed me by the arms and held me in place as Charlotte moved toward me with a wet mess in her bare hands. "Bring them to me." The voice sounded more potent now, more explicit than ever. I didn't hesitate this time. I swung my head to the side and cracked Marlena in the nose, then pushed Charlotte's hand into her face. "Ah!" she screamed. "Get him!" I sprinted into the tunnel, the girls chasing not far behind. I was never the fastest runner in the class, not by a long shot, but the tunnel wasn't very long. I pushed myself forward with everything I had, but every one of their strides equaled 2 of mine. I could feel them gaining on me. My lungs began to hurt. I felt one of them graze the back of my shirt. I was almost at the exit. A hand pushed me by the shoulder, sending me crashing to the ground face first. I bundled into the fetal position and covered my face instinctively, bracing myself. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes to see that I was lying in the field, a few feet outside the exit. I stood and faced the tunnel, but it was empty. No Charlotte, no Marlena, not even the gray woman. I was brought in for questioning by the police, since I was the last person who saw the girls before they disappeared. I told them that we were playing a game. The girls were hiding, and I was seeking. I told them the last place I saw the girls was the tunnel. The department closed the school and scoured the shaft. They found a single set of bones buried inside. My mother's. They still don't have any leads on who killed her or buried her there, but I think I have an idea. The school opened for summer classes today to make up for lost time. When my dad came to pick me up, a low guttural growl poured from the tunnel. "Bring him to me." This story takes place in the summer of 2017. For reference, my friend and I were young teenage girls at the time. We were hanging out one night, and we decided to go on a walk around the pond that was not too far away from my house. It was, as some would say, pitch black outside, although there was some dull light due to the periodically placed street lights. We left my house and began walking up the street in the darkness. All was fine, and we quickly made it to the pond without any issues. We ended up stopping at one end of the pond to take a break on a bench. This bench happened to be right under a light, so if anyone were also at the pond, they could see us as we were illuminated by the light, but we could not directly see anyone else. We talked for a little while as we moved out onto the dimly lit pond, and after a few minutes, I noticed some movement off in the distance. It appeared to be a group of silhouettes approaching us. I am pretty aware of the dangers that exist in the world, and I am quite the paranoid person. This being said, I quickly alerted my friend to the presence of what I assumed was a group of people swiftly coming our way. It should be noted that we were not in the best of areas, and there were usually suspicious activities that took place at night. We debated for a short moment about what we should do. The first option was to keep sitting on the bench and assume that they were harmless individuals who wouldn't say or do anything to us. And the other option was to take no chances with these strangers who had us outnumbered and make a run for it back to my house. We quickly chose the latter and got back on our feet. We started off with a speed walk, but as I kept looking back to check on the mysterious group of people approaching us, I realized that they too were picking up speed. This is when my fear truly kicked in, and my friend and I began to full-on run. I regularly looked back at the group as we continued to run, and I noticed that they began closing the distance between us. We still could not make out any features of the people due to the lack of lighting, so we were just blindly running from these mysterious people. I eventually arrived at my house and hid in my yard while waiting for my friend, who is much shorter and not the fastest runner. She made it back a short while after me, and we went inside, making sure to lock the doors behind us. When we were discussing it after the fact, she said that when she was running, she wasn't looking back to check on them, so we don't actually know if they attempted to follow us the whole way home, or miraculously gave up. We honestly don't even know what happened. If these people meant no harm, they were certainly not doing the best at showing that. But if they were indeed evildoers of some kind, well then, I am glad that we dashed away when we did. This happened when I was 15, in early 2018. I was young and stupid, so don't blame me for the mistakes and choices I made. When I first met him, I honestly didn't think we were related at all. All of my family has light tan, dark brown eyes, and the same sharp nose. In all honesty, I couldn't believe he was my aunt's son. He was pale, so pale that he looked ghostly. His eyes were sunken from obvious lack of sleep, and he was heavier than most kids our age. His hair was black, and he was an inch taller than me, and in sharp contrast to his mother. He was mean, cold, and cunning. Over the next year, he would constantly threaten me, and especially threaten my brother out of spite and hate. If I'm being serious, he had always given me major sketch vibes. His humor was twisted. And dark humor is funny, don't get me wrong, but his jokes were just flat out disgusting. I tried to avoid him when I could, but it proved futile every time, since he knew I would not put up with his BS. "You're all bite," he told me once. I almost punched him in the face then. Pity that I didn't. One day we were walking in the park alone, and we were just talking about school. Normally I would avoid him altogether, but I decided to play nice since I didn't want my Tia to get upset that I didn't like her son. I tried to seem interested in what he was saying, but it was hard, especially considering the amount of things I could have been doing instead. Then, out of seemingly nowhere, he says to me, "I could kill you, you know." I spun my head around to look at him. He was staring right into me, his charcoal eyes digging holes in my head. "What did you just say to me?" I asked, squaring my chest, preparing for a scuffle. I didn't care if my aunt yelled at me. I wanted to put this kid in his place. "Nothing," he said, and he turned to start talking to his mom. Rightfully so, I avoided him even more now, ever the more cautious of not being alone with him, until one specific day when he was accompanying me and his sister to a barbecue next to a river I knew. I hated the idea of him coming with us. He knew I hated him and made it his goal to annoy me while we were there. He talked constantly, never being quiet for more than 2 minutes. He purposely dropped my burger when bringing it to me, and when he jumped out of the water, he shook his head like a dog, getting water all over me. I tried so hard to just try and have a good time, but it was hard when he was so hell-bent on annoying me. Then, he sat next to me. I kept talking to his sister, trying not to meet his gaze. Then, he leaned in and repeated what he said the other day. "I could kill you, you know." I stood up and walked into the woods, telling them both that I was going on a walk. After marching my way far enough into the woods, I sat down next to some brush, and I just sat and calmed down for around 10 minutes before I heard someone trudging towards me. I knew it was a human. The struggling of walking over the rough terrain and the heavy footsteps clued me into who it was. I was in the middle of turning, going to say something to him, but I see a long knife, the same one we had been cutting the meat with. I jump as fast as I can into the brush, covering myself in the leaves and dirt, suddenly grateful for my father's lessons of the outdoors, harsh as they were. I am by no means religious, but when I see his face, and the smile he has plastered on, I start to pray to any god I can think of. He doesn't say anything, doesn't call out to me, nothing. The overwhelming urge to vomit consumes me, and adrenaline begins to pump through my body. I inhaled deeply, trying my hardest to keep calm. But I hear something. Someone breathing behind me. I make a break for it. I try to scream, but he's bigger than me by a ton, and way heavier. He cups his hand over my mouth and holds the knife to a weak point in my back, the same point he had slammed something into me when we were kids. He knew how much I hated anything touching that spot, so he drags the knife down my back, beginning to laugh. With all the courage I have ever had in my life, I bite into his hand so hard, I taste blood. He screams, but he doesn't let his arm drop from around me. I position my arm just enough so the knife wouldn't hit so deeply, and I slam my elbow into his nose, his knife digging into my shoulder. Now I scream bloody murder, and he lets go to try and stem the blood from his nose, which to my amusement, I later found out was broken. Clutching my shoulder, I ran as fast as I could back to my other cousin, who had come looking for us, seeing as we had been gone for almost 15 minutes at that point. I can only imagine what a sight that would have been. A knife basically falling out of my shoulder, and her brother following behind me with a bloodied, crooked nose and a bleeding hand. Upon seeing the knife, she rushed over to me in a couple of seconds. She realized what had happened. We booked it to the car, locked the doors, and proceeded to call the police. The funniest part to me is that he had tried to flee. The fool. The cops found him after 10 minutes and arrested him outright. I gave my statement and filed for a restraining order. To cut an already long story short, he got 7 years of aggravated assault, and me and his sister testified against him. His mom won't accept what he has done and believes that we being his sister and I, were screwing around with dangerous people, and I got stabbed. Because of this incident, a considerable amount of my family doesn't like me. The only thing I can say is, Josh, if you're reading this, you better hope we never meet again. One night when I was around 7 or 8, I had a very strange nightmare. At that age, I was a latchkey kid, which means when I got home from school, I was there alone for about an hour or two until my parents or older siblings got home. I loved the house I grew up in. It was awesome, but dang it, it could be creepy at times. It was not that well made to begin with, and my parents built most of the added-on rooms themselves. It was a large 2-story house that sat on an acre of land, but it was not in the best part of town, as it sat on the outskirts of a quickly growing city. I tell you this because in my dream, I had just got home from school. Like normal, I locked the locks we had on the door and went to put my backpack in my room. Only after I turned around from locking the door, I stopped. I felt something was different. I felt there was someone here. Someone in the house. Worse, I knew they were watching me. Even though it's over 20 years since I had the dream, I recall very clearly standing still and trying to listen for any odd sounds, trying to listen for footsteps or breathing or anything that would be out of place. But all I heard was the creaks and groans of the house. Very scared, I started to tiptoe about. This was before there were cell phones, and there were not any neighbors that I knew well enough that I could go to, at least any that would be home. And at that age, I don't think I knew my mom's phone number, let alone one of my parents' work numbers. The only thing I could think to do is if I saw someone in the house, I would run outside and keep running until a grown-up helped me. So, I went upstairs slowly and quietly, poking my head just above the stairwell to see if there was anyone there. But no one was there. But the feeling of being watched continued. I looked at each room upstairs, knowing that whoever it was watching me. As strange as it sounds, doing this made him feel even closer. It made me visualize in my head a dark outline of a man that was here with me. After checking every room, I traveled back downstairs. At this point, I was so scared that I almost was in tears. Then, I saw that dark outline in the corner of my eye. In reaction, I turned to look at it. But when I did, there was nothing there. I even did a 360, thinking that he must have moved. but there was no one there. Then I saw it again out of the corner of my eye, but this time on the other side. Once again I turned to look, but there was nothing there. Now, at that age I was a kid, a true kid that got scared, played with Ninja Turtles and watched Ghostbusters. I wasn't psychic, nor did I talk to ghosts or anything like that, so when I kept seeing that dark shape out of the corner of my eye repeatedly, I did the only thing I could think to do in my scared state: run. When I entered the living room, I somehow knew it was behind me. Not sure why I knew it was there, as I don't remember feeling heat or hearing breathing, but I knew it was there, so I took off running. Being a stupid kid, I didn't think to run towards the right side of the room, which would lead to the back of the house where the back door was, but I ran towards the left side of the room, because it led to the closest room that I knew had a lock, which was the downstairs bathroom. I ran as fast as I could, feeling that figure behind me, inches away. I ran into the small hallway in which the bathroom was at the end. As I ran, the darkness was sort of overtaking me. Now that I'm older, I can relate it to how a butterfly net is when you swing it in to grab a butterfly. It was overtaking me as I ran, and I could see it at both sides. This whole bit would have lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds total, but to me, it was slowed down. Just as I ran inside the bathroom and past the door frame, hands grabbed my neck. Strong, cold hands wrapped around my neck. Instantly I went cold and everything stopped. Everything went black. This is when I woke up. When I woke up, I screamed. Not because I just had the worst nightmare of my life, but because someone was holding me tight. My mother was sitting on my bed, having grabbed me in a hug, and was rocking me back and forth. Now I know this may sound creepy, but it wasn't. She was scared and crying. Here's what truly makes this memory creepy. She had a nightmare too. In hers, she felt that a dark, unknown figure wanted to do her harm, and so in her nightmare, she dreamed that she awoke to do her normal morning routine. Since she woke up at 4 in the morning for work, she would often go about her routine in the dark to not wake my father. She went to the bathroom, but when entered, she felt something tap against her left shoulder, right past the door. It actually happened a few times. Confused by this as she wasn't fully awake and it was pitch black, she turned on the light. That's when she saw me, dead, hanging from a noose at the same location that I felt the thing grab me in my nightmare. It was there that she knew that the dark figure did the worst possible thing it could to her, which was to kill me. That nightmare shook her badly. So bad, in fact, that she rushed to my room in the middle of the night and held me, thankful that I was alive. She described it in the same way that I did, that it was the most realistic dream she ever had. Neither of us went back to bed that night. Instead, we had graham crackers and milk to try and wash the nightmares away. Then we turned on the radio and played it softly, not to wake anyone. And most of all, we kept all the lights on in the kitchen. Years later, I have no clue why this happened, nor do I have any explanation. And as to what or who the dark figure was, I don't know. Never felt it before or after. The house I grew up could be very creepy at times, but there was a lot of love there, as we were a large, happy family. So it wasn't like it was filled with doom and gloom. I did experience a few weird and scary things over the years that I can't really explain, but by no means could say it was haunted. Over the years, I have had a few conversations with my mom about that night. As she is by far the kindest person I have ever known, I fully believe her when she said that she doesn't know what it could have been. It could have been just 1,000,000,001 chance that we both happened to have had a similar nightmare on the same night. But in my heart, that doesn't feel right. That figure was real. To this day, anytime I see something in the corner of my eye, I get a tinge of fear from that nightmare. It's a horrible feeling too. Makes me feel like a scared little kid again, standing in that house and knowing that figure is watching me. Fresh out of college in 2010, I purchased my first home for me and my young son. The woman who lived there before me died of heart failure in her 50s. Soon after moving in, we found a stray skinny puppy who had a horrible skin infection and just needed a lot of love and care. We took him in, named him Crypto, and nursed him back to health. He was a great dog, so protecting and adventurous, but incredibly loving and sweet to everyone. Crypto had continued medical issues all throughout his too short, nearly 8 years of life. From severe cases of unexplained hives, to tumors on his foot, to a mysterious disease that ultimately caused his liver to fail. The latter ailment came and went, with treatment, for the last 3 years of his life. Outside of camping, hiking, playing in the park kind of fun stuff, Crypto and I spent countless hours at the vet, trying to find out why his body was failing him, so we became close in ways I have never felt with another animal or human. Eventually, towards the end of 2017, Crypto was getting sicker and sicker, refusing to eat much at all. There was really nothing else to be done, so one evening in mid-October, I heartbreakingly took him to the vet to be euthanized. I was with him until the end, and I miss him incredibly. Rewind maybe a week or two. I was obviously very consumed by my dog, who I love as if he were my child, being in pain and suffering while coming to terms with him likely dying sooner than later. I do not recall totally clearly how the message first appeared, but on our everyday plain run-of-the-mill microwave, I noticed a notification. Prior to this day, I never noticed that this microwave had a message button, nor has a message button been on any of the many microwaves I have seen since. One day in early October 2017, I noticed a banner across the readout display of the microwave, indicating an unheard message, with a small red light lit up on the button as if beckoning to be pressed. So I pressed the message button and a recording played. The message lasted about 10 seconds and sounded like mostly static, but there was clearly someone speaking in what appeared to be a deep southern inflection. My initial reaction was, "That's weird," but I thought surely there was a reasonable explanation of some sort. The microwave had been in the house when I moved in 7+ years earlier, so who knows what was on it before me. Maybe there was a power blip and the microwave malfunctioned, so it brought up some old message someone recorded a long time ago that somehow got stored on the microwave. But who knows? Why is there even a message button at all? But I had my dog to worry about, so I put the microwave static message out of my mind, but not before telling my boyfriend, who had just moved in with us a few months earlier. After hearing the staticky voice in the microwave, he became somewhat obsessed with deciphering what the message said. He would wake up and play the message, come home from work and play the message over and over, thinking that he was picking up words here and there. I could not muster the energy to be as enthusiastic as he was, even though I definitely found it to be very odd. My beloved dog was dying, and that was all I could feel and think about outside of normal life. Fast forward back to one of the hardest days my son and I have had together. My boyfriend was working late, so by the time he came home, I was fully wallowing in my grief feelings of loss and perceived failure as a first-time dog mom. But he was right back, obsessing over this message in the microwave as usual. After a while, I make my way into the kitchen to ask him to please come hang out with me. When I walk into the kitchen, he looks at me and stone-faced tells me that he knows what it says. I'm like, okay, what? But he doesn't want to tell me. I told him he needs to tell me and that I want to know now because he is acting like something is wrong. Like, what could the message possibly say that is so terrible that he doesn't think I should know now when before he wanted to know so badly? Eventually he tells me to just listen for myself and I will hear it clearly. So, just as I did before, I pressed the message button and the message played just as before. But this time, there was not the overwhelming static. This time, the recording played a deep drawl of a man's voice. Clearly state matter of fact, as if he was telling you what he had for lunch. That feller right there, he is going to die soon. To this day, I have no explanation as to how the message got in the microwave, or why there was even a message button at all. I can also not explain why suddenly that night the message came through so clearly after the hundreds of times my boyfriend had played the recording in the days prior. No one in my direct family or circle has a deep southern drawl like the one I heard, so I am certain it did not come from anyone I know. We have speculated over the years, sometimes rationally, other times less so. But this is one of the few experiences in my life my boyfriend and I both just do not have a reasonable explanation for. Was someone in my house? Or something less reasonable?